Good afternoon, everybody. Please, could I have a thumbs up if my voice is coming through clear? Excellent. A whole bunch. Well, I'm very impressed with the number of people who've signed on already. Just before Gerard leads us off on the webinar this afternoon, I just want to welcome you all. This is the first of 12 webinars that the CropLife team has already established between now and April of next year. So please, if you have not received the list of webinars that are going to be held in the next 12 months, please speak to your internal person who receives communications from CropLife so that you can see what's available and start planning accordingly. Before I hand over to Gerard, just an introduction to today. The idea of this particular webinar has come about because many of our members, both suppliers but order distributors and their crop advisors, have been asking they need some training so that they in turn can provide training to farm workers and their customers, i.e. farmers. It has also come about because you are all aware of the GHS labeling system that is now in force. And if you weren't aware, you need to know that the GHS requirements make it very clear that the person selling the plant protection solution needs to provide the customer information about what a GHS label looks like and what it all means. So we really are stepping up to provide our members and their employees with the tools so that they can start imparting certain information to their customers, i.e. the farmers. We would also like to inform you that this is an introductory level webinar. We are working with the University of Stellenbosch, where Gerard sits on the training committee. And the idea is to take this webinar training that is going to be presented today to a higher level. It will be something along the line of a master trainer level, and a person who has completed this master trainer course through Stellenbosch University in the future will then be able to train farm workers, farmers themselves, store managers, depot managers, co-op people, etc., in terms of responsible pesticide use, but also responsible pesticide storage, handling and transportation. The idea is that this future course held by Stellenbosch, the master trainer course, will be a SAQA accredited course, so really high level, and because it will be handled under the umbrella of Stellenbosch University, there will of course be a cost involved. But we don't believe that every member or employee of CropLife South Africa member companies will be doing this master training course, but we just wanted you to be aware of what will be coming in the future in terms of the ability or the opportunity for people to take this basic training they'll get today and raise it to a much higher level with a SAQA accredited master trainer course. So I thank you again for joining this first webinar of ours. We will be learning from this for the rest of the program that is already established. So please enjoy, and I'd like to hand over to Gerard to take you through the rest of the webinar. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Gerard.
Thank you, Rod. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can I just also see with the thumbs up of 2 whether you can hear me properly, please? Okay, wonderful. So thank you to Arisa for making this public, that everybody knows about our webinars, and for running the session, and for all my colleagues for the wonderful support in putting this thing together. We did offer training on a similar note many times over the past couple of years, but this is a new course. It is specially trained at yourselves today in this course on training the farm workers. It's not aimed at training a high-level person. Now, I would like to start off by making a statement that to me as an individual, having dealt with farmers and farm workers all over the country of different cultural groups. I regard the farm workers as the most valuable asset in the farm, and I think we owe them training to use the pesticide responsibly because they are the guys mostly working with the pesticides. So I'm going to be going through a lot of slides today. Some of them I might skip over a bit because we only have about 3 hours to do all of the stuff, but I hope that you will learn something today in the course. And because of the fact that we are sitting in an interim phase between the old WHO system and the new GHS system, the first session is going to be giving a bit of guidance on what to give the farm worker in terms of knowledge based on the WHO system of labeling and the new GHS system of labeling. And I know when we use the word GHS, people shiver and there's a lot of tears flowing, but it is coming. So what we aim to do for next year then for a refresher course or a follow-up course is to focus much more on the GHS system of labeling and get farm workers more acquainted with that. Okay, but we'll get into that a little bit later. I think a very important thing to tell your farm workers is that there is an act, and they don't need to know the name of the act, but they need to know that it's Act number 36 of 1947. And tongue in the chicken can tell them to all stand up and put up a hand to see if there's anybody who was born before 1947, because the act will always be the oldest entity in your audience, but it's still a strong act. But they don't need to know the act. The only thing they need to know about the act is Regulation 1716 of that particular date. And it's very important to understand that that regulation forbids any person to use a pesticide for any other thing than what the label says. In other words, for any other purpose, in any other manner, any other type of application type, or any other dose rate, or for any other pest, disease, or weed, or crop, whatever. So that is what the Act mandates the user, whether it's the homeowner, the gardener, the farmer, the farm worker, everybody must abide by this particular regulation. So, and if that is done, then our risk goes out of the window because then we don't have an issue with hazard and with risk. But important to people is to explain to them what is a pesticide label. I think there's a grave misconception in the market that when you work with a pesticide, you open the pesticide booklet or the label and you go to directions for use. That is the least of our worries. And I think what people must understand that Regulation 1716 talks about adhering by the label instructions. Now, the regulatory part is to inform you what is the product about and who registered the product. And then the safety stuff and the precaution stuff that is also part of the instructions of the label. But on the regulatory side, and that's also for, I think, too important to explain to people because of the fact that we're working in the country, we see a little bit of stuff coming into the market that is not registered. To check on every label. Does that label have a trade name, which is associated then with the trademark of the owner of the particular product or the product trademark or a marketing company? Because many times a company might be the owner of a product, but it is marketed by different companies. So these are the colorful things you see on the outside of the box or on the container, the container's label. It will also tell you the type of pesticide. Now, we've often been in argument with people say, but we don't know whether this is a herbicide, fungicide, insecticide because the drums all are white drums or they're all green drums. That's not the issue. The issue is the pesticide label will tell you, is this a herbicide, insecticide, fungicide, or is it an adjuvant? And every pesticide, even within the new GHS system, gives you the general purpose of the pesticide. And that you must just read to see, is it insecticide for row crops? And we hate the word row crops because we don't know what row crop is. But for example, for vegetables or for fruit or for grains, whatever. And that is where you find it under the general purpose. Okay, now what the new GHS is adamant about, and we haven't seen that regulation yet from our dear registrar, is that it will boldly state on top of the label that you have to read instructions to the label and you have to follow the instructions because that was never part of the old WHO system. And the legitimacy of a product is embedded in the registration number, which starts with an L and anything from 4 up to 5 digits, followed by the words Act number 36 of 1947 as a reference act. Then they can look at the active ingredients, which will give you either a chemical or a biological organism and the concentration thereof. And in the new JET system, also a list of other constituents of concern. For example, there might be a solvent in that container, which is of more hazard class than the active ingredient itself. Okay, so that's what people need to take note of, because we have focused all our lives in the WHO system on the active only, not thinking about what we call excipients or co-formulants also. The name and the address of the registration holder must also be there. And sometimes you find that the name and address of the registration holder plus the name and address of the marketing company who's actually the one marketing out to the farmers or the end users out there. And then lastly is then directions for use, which is the end part of the label. But for the farm worker to go to the safety portion, I think is very important. Now, in the new JETS system, we have a signal, which is a diamond to show what is the hazard class of a particular product. There's also a signal word, which talks to the same idea as the hazard symbol. And that you will see coming in now very much into the market with the new labels coming onto the shelves. The precautionary statements are there to guide the person on how to prevent the hazard from transferring or materializing into risk for the user. The warnings will also be there. Okay, so these things, I think, for the farm worker are very important, because it's about protecting the self when you work with the chemicals or with the biologicals, that you have to read these things and make sure you do what it says there. There might be, in certain cases for air application, a reference to a SABS standard, or when you work with, for example, a soil fumigant according to a certain standard. There will be a batch number, a date of manufacture, and thank God now we also have in the new regulation that we're still waiting for, the command to have an expiry date, because many people call me up and ask me, what is the expiry date of your product? And it takes a long time to explain where we're sitting now in the act, but it only says you need a date of manufacture. The new regulation also says there must be an emergency number in case of a poisoning or a fire or disaster. There must be an information number, which we call the client service number. So somebody wants to call up to find out more about the product, about the application and so on. And very important is there must be a strong indication of how to decontaminate the packaging and how to dispose of the empty packaging when you come to the end of the life cycle of the product. And also the same story then on the same breath is how to dispose of the leftover pesticides once you're at the end of the life cycle. And then some of the labels might have treatment protocols in the case of a person being exposed to the product, but that is for the medical doctor, that part. That's not for you and for me, because we aren't qualified or certified to treat a poisoned patient or a person who are exposed to pesticide. So in all, the pesticide label is regulatory, there's directions for use, and there's a safety portion. All of that are important to read. It's not just only the front part of the label or the end part of the label with directions for use. This is what we all used to. In other words, typical WHO format with a color band and pictograms. And I think still at this stage, when you train people on the farm now, and I would guess for the next 2 years, because there will be product going out from shelf to farm, and most of our products have a 2-year shelf life, so they will be on farm shelves or farm store level for the next 2 years, to just go into basically what the old label system means, explain to them the pictogram levels, so go from low toxicity to high toxicity, and then also to give them an idea of what the pictograms mean. Now, I often ask myself whether we ever achieve the objective with the pictograms, because if I see the way people work with pesticides and the answers or the questions I get from the public, I do not think that the pictograms ever serve the real purpose. But they are there for a purpose, because you will always see on every pesticide label, it has that little icon to say it must be locked away. It should always have that icon which says you must decontaminate yourself after handling and use. And then there's the set of requirements when you decant and you mix or prepare your spray mixture with it. That'll hand pouring the chemical into a measuring flask. It will tell you what level of protection you require. It doesn't mean that you always have to use a respirator mask. It doesn't mean that you always have to have a splash-proof apron. It depends on the hazard grading of the chemical, which will be indicated on the label. And the next set, which is on the right-hand side of the hazard statement on the color band, will be the personal protection equipment when you apply the pesticide, which you indicate by the little guy there spraying the pesticide, will tell you overall boots, facial mask, or a respirator mask and gloves. And then there's also things about environmental safety. So not to be applied close to any poultry or to bees or to cattle or close to water. But these things are now rapidly being phased out because of the new GHS system, which is totally different from the old system. But I think impress upon people, very important, always lock the stuff away. And always clean yourself properly after use, and always use your PPE, because remember one thing, it is part of Regulation 1716. These are not advice or advisory symbols. They are instructions that you must wash yourself after working, that you must wear a splash-proof apron if you work with a highly toxic pesticide. So you have to do it. If you don't do it, you contravene the act. So that is something that you need to explain to them, I would guess, still for the next 2 years, until we come to a point, sorry, where we don't see any more of that old WHO labels on the market. When it comes to the new format labels, which are the GHS format labels, and for those of you who don't know, the GHS stands for the Globally Harmonized System for the Classification and Labeling of Chemicals. Okay, so this is a universal system to indicate to the user of the chemical what the hazard class is. Take note, please. I'm not talking about the risk. I'm talking about what is the intrinsic property of that chemical sitting in that particular container. It contains basically 3 very important elements. First of all, the hazard symbol. And in the case of our pesticides, we will mostly be seeing something like, for example, that particular icon, which means it is a carcinogen, or it's a mutagen, or a reproductive toxin, also called a teratogen. But we never use the word teratogen, so rather talk about a reproductive toxin of a reproductieve gifstof. In many cases, our chemicals will have an acute toxicity symbol like that one. And you will notice they're all in the form of an orange diamond with some indication in between, in the middle of it. Many of them will also have the icon to say it is hazardous to the aquatic environment, because think about a pyrethroid. A pyrethroid always has an extreme toxicity for fish and amphibians, so all the pyrethroids will always have that on the label, unless it's a pyrethroid with a very low concentration in a ready-to-use type of formulation. So the hazard symbols must be on the new GHS labels, glaring in your face, but they must be supported then by the signal word. And the signal word explains into the people, if you have this symbol, or you have that symbol, or you have, for example, the symbol for environmental toxicity, what is the gravity of the danger? Is it, or the hazard? Is it really dangerous? Or is it just that there's a warning that you have to be careful of the stuff? Danger means you have to be extremely careful. Warning means be careful. Okay, so that's grading the hazard class for you. And thirdly then, which I think is very important for the farm worker, what are the precautionary statements? It will include a lot of information about what type of PPE must be worn when you work with a pesticide. What must be done in the case of an exposure? In other words, like an accidental splash on the hands, accidental inhalation, or accidental ingestion. It will talk about the storage. In other words, it will tell you lock away. And it must, according to the new GHS regulations, also talk about the disposal at the end of the life cycle of that container, of the packaging and the leftover stocks, what to do with it. So in general, this is all the new stuff that you will see on the new GHS format labels, of which you will see on the shelves already in the country. The directions for use remain very much unchanged, so they're simply the same as what we had in the old WHO format, where you had the crop, you had the pest, you had the dose, and you had the particular instructions on how to mix and what to do with it. So I think for a start, you still hammer down the throats of the people what the old labels mean, and you start giving them a good indication of what to look out for on the new GHS format label, because I've even been asked by some government officials, what do these things mean? They've never seen them before. So we've got a transfer phase now in the country where we move over into a new type of a system. And just to give you an example, and I took the Max Force gel, which is a cockroach gel, to show you what a typical type of label will be. So there is the hazard symbol, which says to you in that case, if you can focus there, it is harmful to the aquatic environment. The signal word is up there, the precautionary statements up there, and directions for use are up there. So a very important notice, and that's why I call them VIN 1 and VIN 2, is for the end user. And sorry, not for the end user, but for the salesperson who sells a pesticide to the end user. In other words, if I'm an agent and I work with a farmer, or if I'm a retailer and I work with a customer who's a normal consumer, I need to give the person some guidelines on what the hazards of the particular product mean. And I also need to explain to them what precautions need to be taken. And they also need to tell them what to do at the end of the life cycle of the particular product. In other words, triple rinse and bring it to a recycler. Or if you got leftover pesticide, it must go to a particular collection point for thermal destruction. So that is a mandatory thing for the trader who sells the pesticide to the end user. It is also mandatory for the person using the pesticide to adhere to all the precautions and the label instructions. Now, there's again a misconception. If you think about the public out there that are protecting and hiding behind the Consumer Protection Act, they think they've got no responsibility. No, they make a mistake. Because of the fact that Regulation 1716 is still very much in play, which says you may only use the pesticide according to the label instructions. So if that pesticide tells you you must wear gloves when you apply Max Force, you shall wear gloves when you use Max Force. If it tells you you must take the empty container to recycle at the end of life cycle, that's instruction, not advice given to you. So there's a dual responsibility. Us as the people selling the pesticide to somebody, and those of us who buy the pesticide from a trade person and use the pesticide. So people mustn't think that the onus only lies on the industry to take responsibility for the use of a pesticide. It is a due responsibility shared by the buyer and by the seller and by the people applying it. Now, the unfortunate thing about the GHS system is the GHS system only talks about the hazard. It doesn't actually take into account the risk. Now, I've tried to make it into simple terms for you, and I've used a couple of pictures there to explain to you the difference between a hazard and a risk. So technically, I'm going to start off at the bottom here. And I took the example of, for example, a typical firearm like a handgun. That is intrinsically a hazardous object. Doesn't matter where it is, in my safe, on my counter, in a gun shop, it is a hazardous object. And the same with a pesticide. It is intrinsically a hazardous object if you have a 5-liter can of paraquat standing on a shelf somewhere. But the risk for this particular object, the firearm, and the risk and the risk for the paraquat standing on the shelf somewhere is technically zero if there's no one close to or handling that particular object or the particular pesticide. But now you give the pesticide to a person, or you give that handgun to a person, and sorry, ladies, I just found a beautiful picture there. But I had to use this picture to show you. Now you start creating an extreme risk if you hand over that particular object, which is the firearm or the pesticide, to somebody who starts handling it, if the person is not going to be cautious with handling the particular object or the particular pesticide. So risk can only materialize at the point where a person starts handling the particular object. And in our case, we say, if the farm worker starts working with a pesticide, then the risk starts becoming something. If it's just standing in a store, properly locked away, the risk is zero, even though there is still a hazard. Okay, and I firmly believe, as a chemist and toxicologist and working for the industry, that we can mitigate risk down to virtually zero if we do everything according to what the label not advises us, but what the label commands us of us as the end users of pesticides. And if you look at the pictures up there, there's a lady handling a pesticide and she got a pair of gloves on. So there is a hazardous substance in her hands properly sealed with gloves on, there's a minimal risk. There's a farm worker with his gloves on, with the pesticide still sealed, minimum risk, even though he's handling the hazardous substance. But now there's a farm worker applying a pesticide with a high risk because he's not using the appropriate PPE. So I hope you understand that risk is a man-made thing coming out of the hazardous nature of a particular object. And I can list for you thousands of hazardous objects that never cause any risk or never materialize in risk because they don't get into the hands of people. It's just like a car. A car is by nature hazardous. If the car stands in your garage, nothing can happen to anybody. But the moment you jump in the car and you drive the car, then you start creating a risk for people, yourself or those around you. So I think that is what you explain to people, that don't worry about the hazard. You have to worry about the risk, and the risk is something that you cause by being irresponsible, or the risk is something that you take completely away by being responsible and checking and making sure that you as the user use the pesticide strictly according to what the label says. Right, so this is what I try and reiterate to you, that I don't personally believe, and I know that some state officials and some of the greenies and academics will differ from me significantly with my attitude here, but my position is that I don't see why anybody should be fearful of any pesticide. They're inanimate. In other words, they don't have a life of their own, even though they've got intrinsic hazards. But if you lock that pesticide away in a proper store or in a proper cupboard where no one can reach it, nothing can happen to that unless there's a human or unless there's a natural catastrophe like a flood or a volcano bursting out of its seams, or there's something happening in the environment. So I don't see any reason to fear it. So like in a case like that, a pesticide sitting in a store, no problem. It is when you bring people or animals close to the particular pesticide, they start becoming a risk. If you just look at that case there, that is exactly where we see the horrific risk being presented to us as people when a child goes into a cupboard under a kitchen sink, and we've got chlorine, we've got bleach, we've got all the stuff in there that people should not be touching. So that is a risky situation. If you look at this down here, this is extremely high risk because it's operable pesticides, unattended, open, leaking out, full of dust, stuff like this. So understand then that here is a situation with high hazard and extreme risk. Here's a situation with maybe medium hazard, but extreme risk because it's a child that doesn't know anything about the hazard of the chemical. So uninformed people handling or using a pesticide immediately creates, and I should have added in there, an extreme risk. Because I can see when I get the poison qualamine and you get somebody who can't even find the trade name of the product in the box, that it is extremely risky for the person even to work with it. Then second one is when people just act recklessly. Okay, recklessly means that you know what you're supposed to be doing, but you're not doing it. And I'll give you an example. When I drive up from my area in Kleberge up the Langkloof towards Otenikwa or George, and I see a young farm worker on the tractor without his PPE on, it's a reckless person because he was trained by myself some years ago to use PPE. He doesn't use it. So he creates an immediate risk for himself because he doesn't handle the chemical responsibly. The third point there is that any case where children, pets, or animals come close to pesticides is a very risky situation. And you'll be amazed on how many children and pets get poisoned every year in homes and gardens because the parents did not take care of the chemicals and they didn't lock them away where they were not used. And lastly, just from my perspective, having worked with empty containers for the last 15 years, is to leave empty containers which are not properly cleaned out unattended and allow people to use them for their food or the beverages for drinking water. These are all examples of where the hazard becomes a risk because you put a person onto that and you allow the person then to work with an hazardous object, which in our case is a pesticide. So if you think about this, none of this should happen if we use our common sense. And most of our pesticide labels, I think, are easy enough to say, but they are common sense things that people should do to prevent the hazard from materializing into becoming a risk. Okay, so this is what I want to say about the label. And I don't think you have got to go into more details with the farm worker, because from a personal perspective, the farmer is the person that should decide which chemical on which crop for which pest, disease, or weed, and what is the dose rate, and what is the application technology, and what are the climatic conditions that should be looked out for before you start applying the pesticide. The farm worker should at least know the basics and know that there are certain things on that label that I should read as John working on a farm to protect myself against the risk from something which might be a hazardous substance. And that, I think, is what you must draw into the farm workers. And I've done training for many thousands of farm workers, and depending on where you come in the country, sometimes you find that the knowledge is quite basic. Sometimes you find that it's such a laugh when I did a training course together with my friend Quade for the farm workers who run the berry farms in the Southern Cape of George. After about 50 minutes, one of the guys stuck his hand up and said, "You know, sir, you're actually wasting our time. We know everything." And then it became a debate between myself and them. It was fantastic to see the level of competency and the understanding of those people about the hazard and the risk. And they all came there with the overalls and all the gloves and everything. So don't always think that the farm workers are literate. Don't always think they don't know anything, but it's your duty to make sure they get to a point where they are totally responsible when they work with a pesticide. Now, you might ask the question now, if your job is then to go out to a farm and you train the farm workers, why do you talk to them about the safe storage on pesticides on the farm? Isn't that something for the farm manager or the farmer to listen to? I do believe, yes. And for our advanced course that Rod mentioned that we're going to be presenting through University of Stellenbosch, there's going to be a lot of discussion around the safe storage on pesticides at different levels, at warehouse level, depot level, farm level, retailer level, and so on. But why then talk to the farm worker? I think it is a political tool we can use to get the farmer to start complying with the standards for safe storage of pesticides on the farm. And I've done it in my life many times where I go to a farm and I arrive on the farm and I see there's nothing on the farm which is kosher with the pesticides. And I train the farm workers, and a month later when I get there, I can see over there now the pesticide farm or the pesticide store on the farm looks like a five-star hotel, because the farm workers complained about the fact that the store was not right and the store was not kosher in terms of harboring the pesticides. So give them some of the very basics and explain to them why we want a farm store to be of a certain nature. And if you just look at the two pictures on the top there, on the right-hand side, we've got this beautiful plastic little warehouse you can buy from, or little depot you can buy from Builders Warehouse for about 18,000 Rand. I've given it a red cross. On the left-hand side, we've got a brick and mortar building with steel and windows and stuff. That's got a nice a green right mark. And that's exactly explaining to people that this might look very good, but it's particularly useless as a pesticide store because it's made of plastic. So if there's any heat or any fire, that place will go up in flames immediately. Whereas at least with the brick and mortar building, it protects your commodities inside against fires on the outside. So we will go into a bit more about the construction of a pesticide warehouse on a farm, but some of the basic principles is that it should be at a place on the farm which is close enough to the main operation to keep a very good eye on it. In other words, it mustn't be a kilometer away from the farmstead or from the store or the tractor store. It must be there where people can keep an eye on it to make sure it is secure, that no one can access to it, and that it is not burgled at night by people wanting to steal the chemicals for other type of purposes. Obviously, when we talk about pesticide, there's always the grave danger of contamination of the environment, in particular with water. That's why we tell people, look on the websites and go and check on your farm, what is the 100-year flood level in your area? And make sure you build your pesticide store above the 100-year flood level. And we've seen over the last, I think 3 or 4 seasons with the excessive rain we've had in some parts of the country where total farms got washed away because it exceeded the 100-year flood level because of excessive rain. So don't take a chance. When you're close to a river, make sure you know what the 100-year flood level is. And anyway, the rule is that no pesticide store, whether an agent store or a farm store in particular, Must be anywhere close to an open water source, like a dam or a pan or a swimming pool or a pond or a river or a stream on the farm. And also for boreholes, because if something happens in the store, there's a fire or a spill, and you contaminate that open water, it's going to cost you an absolute fortune to remove that contaminated water, and you might not even be able to use your borehole for a long time. It becomes contaminated. So think about the water. Water on a farm is as valuable as your farm worker. It's a commodity without which a farm cannot operate. Okay, so another thing to take into account is that to prevent any fires is to have a clear area of 50 meters around the store with virtually no combustible vegetation. In other words, grasses, broadleaf weeds, any weeds and stuff like this removed. Either a couple of trees, fine, but not combustible vegetation, because we know what happens in the country with arson, and we know how many veld fires there are. So you must also have a good supply of electricity and water. Electricity to have proper lighting and light and water in case of a big spill. And there must be good access then for your delivery vehicles, because many of the farms have quite a big store, and then the trucks come, the dangerous goods truck come deliver the chemicals onto the farm. And in case of an emergency like a fire or a serious poisoning, that the fire brigade or an ambulance must be able to get quite easily to the particular store or depot on the farm and don't get stuck in the mud. But what people also don't realize is, and I've seen it now with my travels around the country in the last 2 months, stores belonging to agents and stores belonging to farms that are virtually on the doorstep of a school. So the rule according to this South African National Standard 10206 is that any store of pesticides must be at least half a kilometer away from schools, places where people live, hospitals, retail outlets, food processing or beverage places, entertainment and business premises. So for the farm itself, you don't build the pesticide store next to your little farm village or right on your own residence on the farm, and not right next to the dairy on the farm. It must be removed from those areas, but still within the site where you can say, I have control over the security of my area. So the best is then to have a standalone proper farm store like you see in this case. That's a very nice example of where you can get yourself a good second-hand container. And believe me, nowadays you can buy the big shipping containers for about 22,000 bucks, which is not much. And you get yourself a standalone store on the farm for pesticides. Or if you want to use part of your bigger stores, then it must have a solid firewall to protect your pesticides in case of a fire in that particular store. So these are the sort of the founding principles of a proper pesticide store on a farm. But when it comes to the construction, this is where I see the cracks in not only farmer stores, but I've been to formulation plants in my life. I've been to mega warehouses, and shoo, sometimes I feel I want to just jump on the plane and fly away, because it sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. So the floor must always be concrete. Don't think about using a normal dirt floor, because if there's a chemical spill, the dirt absorbs all the chemicals and you can't clean it up. You've got to dig out all that. So a proper smooth surface concrete floor without any cracks. Now, most concrete floors have an expansion joint, because concrete with heat and cold does expand. Those concrete or the expansion joints can be sealed with a polymer that is chemically resistant, and you can find these polymers from any good co-op anywhere in the country. So make yourself a good solid concrete surface, because if there's a spill, to clean up solid concrete is very, very easy. The walls of the floor, preferably brick and mortar, but if you don't want to go to that extent to build something with brick and mortar, it must be fireproof steel. So in other words, if you want to use corrugated iron, not the cheapest one you buy from the co-op, you must use a heavy gauge proper steel to make sure it doesn't warp when there's a fire. All the doors, and sometimes you find 2 or 3 doors on a farm store, it must be steel doors, and the security gates must be proper steel, and they must all be lockable. Right, it can be a good padlock, or it can be a mortise lock, doesn't matter which, but it must be lockable. The windows, and this is the biggest failure that I see all over the country with all types of warehouses and doors. The windows must be steel frames that cannot be opened. People think, yeah, we need an open window because it's good for ventilation. No. Why do we need a closed window? It is to prevent theft, because if you have a window that can be open, believe me, the criminals are ingenious enough. They watch all the TV movies and they see how you open a window with a little pocket knife or a credit card. So they must not be not be able to be opened, and the panes must be thick 8mm reinforced glass. That's going to cost you a bit of money, but the purpose behind the thick glass is, in case of a fire, that the thin panes don't crack. Now, the normal panes in a house is seldom more than 2.8mm. That thing cracks like hell when you get any temperature going up over about 280 to 300 degrees Celsius. And a normal good fire in the store is easily reaching 700 degrees Celsius. So that's why you need the reinforced glass. If you look at the SABS 102, it talks about the fact that you may not use any aluminium. And we stress that to people, that you don't use aluminium because aluminium warps and it also auto ignites when there's a fire in the place. So aluminium completely out. It does allow for wood to be used for the roof trusses, but we advocate from CropLife SA to our farmers, in order to keep yourself safe, rather go steel and steel only. Forget about the wood, because if there's a fire and those wooden trusses catch a little flame and they start going up a flame, you lose the entire store. So stick to steel. So steel trusses, steel frames, steel walls, everything with steel, with proper ventilation and with proper skylights to give you enough light to work in, and proper ventilation, like for example, air bricks or a whirly bird on top, or extractor fans, to make sure you always have fresh air in a farm store. Now, I've been to farm stores where you walk in and it smells like roses. I've been to farm stores where you choke on the fumes of the organophosphate because there's not enough ventilation. So ventilation can be simply sorted out with a good whirly bird, only one on the roof and one brick in the wall, a ventilation brick can sort out all that for you. What is completely absent in the country is the bunding wall. The purpose of the bunding wall around the store is, in case of a massive spill of chemicals, is to keep the chemicals contained so that it can be sucked up by a super sucker and taken off to a hazardous waste facility, and it doesn't spill out all of the environment and poison the entire farm around you. So bunding wall is what we normally call a 2x2 brick. In other words, 2 bricks wide and 2 bricks high. And best is then to plaster them over and make a seal around your store. And then with a ramp, obviously, for the forklift, if you need something like that, to go into the store quite easily. But the bunding wall is primarily there then to make sure that you contain the spill in case of a big fire. The lighting, I've taken out from the old days. We used to talk about fluorescent tubes. Fluorescent tubes are going to be totally banned in the country. I think by the year 2028, there will be no more mercury bulbs in the country. So put in LED lights, and I would prefer that you tell people that you use the cool light, which is the bright white one, and not the warm one, because the warm one often gives you a very poor light and you can't work properly in that. Or you can also put the skylights in the roof. In other words, if you have typical corrugated iron, you buy that the clear ones that you put in between to give you light in your store, so that the store manager and the people working there have adequate lighting to work with the stuff. But what we also see in terms of the GHS regulations and also the SANS 10206 is that it says to us that anything which is now GHS danger categorized must be in a lockable cage in your store. Now, this is something which I need to debate with our industry over the next couple of months, because I spoke to a company the other day and said to me, they're going to transform their own agent depots into the entire depot will be a danger category thing, that you don't have to have a normal store and a cage in the back with all the dangerous goods locked away. So maybe for the farm, tell the farm, make sure that your entire store is completely sealed off and it is acting as if the entire store is a danger category store. In other words, everything is locked away. You've got everything behind a proper steel door. There's a security gate which is always locked. whether somebody's inside or outside, and only one person may enter that, and that is the store manager. Okay. It's also advisable, especially in the current situation with our country, which is crime-ridden, to have an alarm system which is linked to the armed response. And for the farms, they often have their own system that alert them to anything happening on the farm. So that's advisable. The ventilation I spoke about, whirlybirds or extractor fans, and if it's an extractor fan, not electronic, because that spark, in case of anything happening, can ignite some fumes in the place. So you put the normal extractor fan that will work with a normal wind movement, and you don't need to have any energy into that. It will create its own sort of whirling effect and extract all the fumes from the farm store. And then lastly is to have the warning sign on the outside of the store. Now, if you look at the standard, it says there must be at least one at the main entrance of the store. If you have a big farm store, and I know there are farms that have huge stores, the advice from CropLife SA is put the warning sign up at every door on the outer wall next to the door. And this is what the sign should look like. It should give you a very good indication that you have toxic substances, or you can even say just poisonous substance, no unauthorized entry, no entry without personal protective equipment, and it must have skull and crossbones on to indicate to people this is a place of danger. All right? Because if somebody goes in there and you didn't have it up and something happens to the person, you know what people are like. They kind of sue the farm and say, I was poisoned by the farm because didn't know what's going to, it's not supposed to be in the place. To protect yourself, give them the bare minimum. Toxic substances, no unauthorized entry, no entry without personal protective equipment, and the two hazard signals up there, right? Then obviously good to put your farm business name there and the logo if you have it. The number of the manager or the owner, important. A 24-hour emergency number, and there's my number that most people use. I'll come to this number now. A hospital or clinic close to you that you know that operates. The ambulance service close to you if it does operate. And the fire brigade close to you if it does operate. The SABS number, well, you can try it. I've tried that number myself, and I still have to get the response to that particular number. But very important for yourself is at least a farm manager's number there and an emergency center number there in case of a fire or a spill or a human exposure to a pesticide. And then hopefully you've got a clinic or hospital close by, and you've got a fire brigade close by that can help you in case of a really big fire. So what we advocate from CropLife SA is the only thing that stands in the standard is that your signage must be in at least a 75mm bold print so that people can read easily. But we tell people, make your board a meter wide and 750 high. Well, that is now a significant board, which is about, I would say, close on an A0 size. And you put that up at every door and every entrance that you have on your pesticide store on the farm. And what we also advocate, have it in 2 local languages. I know in KZN, Farmers Agricare, have it in English and Zulu. If you go to Limpopo province, right up in Lavubu, you will have it in Afrikaans and Tshivenda. If you go to other places, it might be English and Xhosa in the Eastern Cape where I live. But this is then to give the person coming close to your store ample opportunity to read about the fact that this is a place of danger. Okay? So that you can protect yourself against people making a claim that they didn't know this is a dangerous place to go into. Now, very important is, this sounds like an overkill, but to protect yourself, there must be one single person in charge of the store. I've been onto commercial farms where everybody's got access to the store. But I've also been to a commercial farm in the Western Cape where there's one guy who's a store manager. He's the only guy on the farm who's got the key, which is fantastic. Not even the farm owner or the farm manager's got a key to the store. So he's lucky tough, the guy. You have to sign a book when you get there. You get a little card from him to say, you're allowed to go into my store. When you're done, you sign the book out again and you give the yellow card back to him again. I like that because it means there's proper control on who enters the store and who leaves the store, because that is the way to protect the farm against any claim from people that went to the store. It also prevents theft of your chemicals from the store, because I can tell you in South Africa, there's a lot of theft of chemicals. or even biological remedies from farm stores. So train your farm manager, have a simple access control book. Make sure everybody signs the book that goes in. If an agent comes to the farm, tell him, luister Dirk, I want you to sign the book. I know you're my chemist, you're my crop advisor, but just sign my book to show my boss that I make sure I control my store properly. Give him a little card when he's done, sign the book out again, and then you can do a regular security check. That is the way to conduct the store properly. If you don't do it that way and something happens, oh my word, you're going to have some hard explaining to do to authorities if somebody gets poisoned and you don't have all records to show that you were diligent in making sure everybody is properly governed in terms of the chemical store. So this is something that many of our crop advisors and our people in CropLife have seen already. And I'm going to use this slide again universally for many other presentations, because this is what we like to see and that's what we don't like to see. This is what I saw personally myself on a farm in the Northwest Province. That's what the guy told me, this my gif store, my chemical store. And I can tell you all of it was, I jumped into my master bucket and I scattered off the palm. Could just see there's a mortality on the way 100%. It can be a cow, it would be a human being, but somebody was going to get poisoned. This is in the European Union, somewhere, I don't know where the country, but this guy has at least, and I don't agree with his signage there, but at least it's a proper steel-clad pesticide store with a lockable door. This up there is from a smallholder farmer. And I think that was somewhere in Limpopo province. It's not expensive, but it's a little container. You've got nice shelves. Everything is packed, wonderful, on the place, clean, tidy, neat, perfecto. On the left-hand side top there, this is a big commercial type of a farm store where they work with lots and lots of pesticides. Everything's on shelves. It's standing on wooden pallets. It's nicely packed, super duper. This is another example of wonderful where they got that lockable cage for the danger group of pesticides, where you can slide the door closed in the evening, you can lock it up, and no one apart from the store manager can go in and get access to those particular chemicals. And then lastly, when we did the cleanup operation in Limpopo in 2006 with the sorry if I get quiet, I'm just drinking some coffee, yeah. But that's what we saw on a farm when we did the cleanup operation with the African Stockpile Program in Limpopo in the year 2006. This is what some farm stores look like, and that is an absolute death trap. With a man or mouse or cow going in there, you're not going to escape from that place alive. You're not going to escape from that place alive. With these places, your risk is absolutely minimal. Your risk with this is absolutely mortal if you go and you work in a place like this. So I hope I've illustrated to you visually what is good and what is bad. I don't think there's a maybe and an if or an and a yes and a but and a gray area when it comes to pesticide storage. It's either the right thing to do or it is the wrong thing to do. There isn't a yes, but maybe we can do this and maybe do that. You do the right thing, because you will only know the consequences when that place catches fire and goes up into flames. So that's why I say, show this to your farm workers, because many of them are in charge of the farm store. And they then would actually guide the farmer to make sure that the farmer will then do the right thing and get the store up to standards, because it's for their own protection as well. Okay. Then I want to go on to the management of the pesticide stocks on the farm, because one of our biggest problems in the country, and I might shock you now, but I know that on our farms in the country, there's at least 880 tons of pesticides sitting there waiting to be recovered and waiting to be disposed of. That is going to cost the country nothing less than about 48 million rand to clean up the country. So it's because of bad management. And very often I've also seen serious mishaps where cattle die, where people die because of wrong management of pesticides in a pesticide store. So for a start, segregate the types. Good idea to have the store separated into a solid section and a liquid section. Now, there's something, some of you might sit there in the background and I can't see your face. You might think, oh, this Verdone is talking rubbish. It's a good idea. It's good practices. Okay, so you've got your solids in one place and you've got your liquids in one place. If you have bulk quantities, you put them on pallets. And I saw in the chat box just now, the question came up, are wooden pallets still allowed? Yeah, they're still allowed. Okay, not everybody has moved over to the plastic pallets yet. The challenge with the wooden pallet, if there's a spill, then the wooden pallet would have to go for thermal destruction because it's now toxic waste. Whereas if it is a plastic pallet, you can clean a plastic pallet very easily. The complaints from people is the plastic pallets weigh a ton. The wooden pallets are lightweight, but I can slowly see how many of our farmers start moving over and they're buying the plastic pallets because they've got a much longer lifespan. They're much easier to clean and they're much safer for the situation in a farm store. So I would strongly plead for segregation into liquids and solids. And if they're stacked on the floor on a pallet and they're stacked in tiers, we normally tell people nothing more than 2 high. In other words, you see this one there, one level, another level, not the third level, because what I've seen even in commercial stores, if you go 3 levels high, it start paneling the bottom containers. In other words, they start warping, and that is a guaranteed recipe for a spill. And you don't want to know what a spill cleanup will cost you. I can tell you a spill cleanup in a pesticide store for 1 drum can cost up to 80,000 Rand to clean up one particular spill in a store. So do it the right way. This is another one to stress to people is if you have a big farm store, and you stack your pesticides on shelves, it must be steel shelves. You can't use wooden shelves because wooden shelves can't take the weight. And you can't even think about using this new plastic shelves that make out of recycled pesticide containers because that polypropylene and the HDP plastic is not strong enough. So you must use steel because they can carry the weight. And I think we all know by now that you never stock a herbicide on top, because if a drum leaks, which is going to happen sometime in the future of mankind, if that herbicide leaks onto the fungicide drum or the insecticide drum, and you now go and do insect control or you do disease control on the plants, and it's contaminated with a herbicide, man, oh man, will you suffer crop losses like mad if that happens. So you do not stock them above. So the principle is herbicides at the bottom, then the fungicides, then the insecticides. And this is now a situation with pesticide that might be of high hazard with a low risk because you've done it in the right way. Okay? So don't forget about the fact that nothing is always guaranteed. So even though it might be a steel drum or a good heavy gauge ATP drum, there is a chance that the drum might be compromised. There's a chance that the drum might leak. There's a chance that the cap might just jump off and leak. So don't take the chance. Always keep the herbicides as low as possible on the floor. And if you stack them like this on a shelf, 100%. If you stack them on the floor, always on a pallet. Okay, I've mentioned this in terms of the HH products. And remember now, when we go over to the GHS, all of them that would be classified as danger must be locked in a separate cage according to the Hazardous Substances Act, which many people don't know about and which we're trying to educate our industry about, but that is a requirement. So it might be better for all of us to say, just make the entire store an HH store or a danger store and lock everything up and don't allow any access. So that's about the safe storage and responsible storage. When it comes to your record keeping, and the record keeping is there to make sure you get the value for what you paid for. Okay, so the store manager or the farm manager in charge of the store must keep a good record. In other words, it can either be a record book of the stock coming in and the stock going out, or they can use electronic system on many of the farms. They've got stuff on the computers and they know what's coming in and going out, because we have to maintain the first in, first out principle. The purpose behind that is to prevent pesticides becoming old and becoming expired and becoming obsolete, because normally the cost for disposal is between 4 and 6 times the value of the commodity. And unfortunately, it is going to cost somebody money to dispose of that obsolete stock. But if you could keep good records, you will know what is your younger stock, and you put them in the back of the store. And you will know what is your older stock, and you bring it to the forefront of the store, that you use the older stock first up, that you don't get stuck, becoming expired, and becoming a problem in terms of recovery and disposal in the long run. So these are principles that even the farm store manager need to know, and even the farm workers need to know. So if you look on the labels, hopefully in the very near future, when we start getting the new JHS into play, all the containers must also have expiry date. Currently, we only have a date of manufacture because that's what the regulations require. And if the farm workers argue, but how do I know now what is the expiry date? Explain to them in simple terms. You take the date of manufacture, you add on 2 years, and that is the shelf life of the product. After the 2 years, the product is technically no longer valid because there's no guarantee it is of the same composition and the same quality as when it was packaged in that particular container. Okay? It is not always scientifically true, but that is what the law commands of us. Unless you have some of the, I see some of the herbicides now have an expiry date which is 4 years after manufacture. Why? Because the company did a real-time shelf life study to say my compound is still valid after 4 years. But for the meantime, generally, most of our pesticides are valid only for 2 years, and some of the biologicals valid for a shorter period of time. So you work it out based on the date of manufacture, unless it has printed on the side of the container the expiry date. So things that I see that are quite shocking, not only in farm stores, but in agent depots. When I go to a co-op, I sometimes just sneak around there, and when they look at me, go into the back and I see what's happening out there, and I wonder myself, how do you get away with this? You never store animal feeds. You never store flammable liquids. And you never store any inorganic fertilizers in a farm store. I'm not talking about the foliar feeds and the liquid fertilizers that are packaged in proper HDP containers. They are more than welcome to be in your pesticide store in a separate section. But the question is, why not the flammables? It's simply because of the fact, if something happens there and there is a bit of a fire, and you've got your diesel fuel there, or you've got a can of typical petrol 95 grade petrol in that store, and that goes up in flames, then the entire store burns out. And I don't know whether you've ever seen a chemical store going up in flames, but it is a spectacular disaster. And that is why you don't allow any combustible liquids in a store. Okay, nothing of the nature. That must be in a total different store. The question arises, why no animal feeds and why no inorganic fertilizers? Because the containers are sealed of the pesticides, and the fertilizers and the animal feeds are sealed in the polypropylene bags. Now, let's take this. Many of our fertilizers at the farm level are in woven polypropylene bags, and most of our animal feeds are in woven polypropylene bags, which are very porous. So if there's a chemical spill inside the source somewhere, and that chemical is, for example, a volatile organophosphate, and I'm going to take the one methamphetamine here. That methamphetamine will very rapidly vaporize, and it will start contaminating these two commodities, like the fertilizer and the animal feed. It will absorb it in their matrix, and when you apply that animal feed then in the cattle trough, you're sure to lose a couple of animals. Or when you apply your fertilizer, there might be a knock-on effect on your crops or on your lawn, whatever. So you don't store it. It is, I think it's common sense, but unfortunately, people don't actually think about these things in terms of common sense. So our rule is pesticides, 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 nothing else in the store. Okay. And what you may also not do is to smoke, eat, or drink in the store. It is disallowed because it is a place of hazard. It's a place of risk. If you smoke, eat, and drink in the store, you make it a place of risk. If you don't smoke, eat, and drink in the store, it's a place of only hazard. So why don't we store a vehicle in there? Because of the fact that in many of our stores around the country, there are rodents. And I would like to believe that there's no store in the country without a rat. There must be a rat in every store. And rats have this nasty habit of jumping into a vehicle's engine and start gnawing on the wires, and then there's a spark, the vehicle goes up in flames, and you've got to fire in the store. So that's why you don't store a vehicle in the store, because of the vehicle being a potential source of fire in the store. That comes back into what I said. For a pesticide store on a farm, pesticides, 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 nothing else. Okay? When it comes to the safety inside a pesticide store, if there's a fire, you have to have the dry power fire extinguishers. You try and move away from water as much as possible, because the moment you start dispensing water, then you create a huge volume of contaminated water. And the more volume, the more cost for the farmer to clean up. So normally with a fire in a farm store, it's a small fire. Depending on what they do, extinguish a fire very rapidly with the right powder, and you don't have a disaster. The hand wash basin must be there. And I don't know whether I'm still sure for myself whether it should be inside or outside the store. I would like to believe it should be inside the store, because the store manager needs to wash his hands before locking up and leaving the store. So the hand wash basin is there for the person working in the store, handling the chemicals, keeping the locks, keeping the records, handing all the PPE to wash his hands, plus obviously a good hand soap and a squeeze bottle with clean fresh water for rinsing the eye in case of a splashing in the eye. Now, splashing happens very often. Ask me, I'm a chemist. I worked in laboratory. I worked in factories. I work making 250 tons of chemicals in a factory. Splashing does happen. So there's going to be a case sometime in your life where you did get splashed in the eye. And the best and the easiest way to have a soft bottle like this, it costs you $12.50 with cold water to rinse your eye out. Some of the basins do have an irons fountain, but you don't need to read that. If you have the squeeze bottle, it is 100%. Then we also need a first aid kit, and the first aid kit is there for general injuries like a cut or a bruise or a chafing wound or whatever. It's not to treat a poisoned patient, because no one on the farm who's not a qualified healthcare professional counsels person is mandated or authorized to treat a poisoned patient. It's just for the normal injuries. And many farm workers get an injury. You know, the tractor operator, the people working with whatever, they get a little injury. So there must be plasters, a couple of headache tablets and stuff like this. And then please, just also a very simple spill kit for the farm also, in case there's a spill in the farm store. Now people say, yeah, but I've never had a spill. Guess what? Life goes on. The earth will possibly go on for another couple of billion years, and humanity will carry on for also maybe another 1,000 or so years. So a spill is going to happen. And if you have a proper spill kit, then the worry goes down, the risk goes down. And you can buy them commercially from companies, or you can make up your own kit. And what we tell people is have a nice 210-liter open-air drum or a wheelie bin. I checked the other day, the wheelie bins are expensive, but they cost about $867 from a hardware store. If you go to your co-op, they might be cheaper. That's where you put all your hazardous materials into when you pick it up. In other words, any spilled materials. When you have a broom or a spade, it must be plastic or stainless steel, because most of the chemicals are corrosive to normal mild steel. You have a small scoop that you use, for example, for a small spill, also plastic. And then absorbent materials. You can have Arabic gum that you see on the left-hand side there, which is wonderful because it's completely inert. It doesn't react with anything with chemicals. You can have a micolite, the one over there. And then you've got other types of materials like these, what we call the absorbent sausages or absorbent booms that you can put around your spilled area. And these you can buy commercially from Dryzit or Rapid Spill Response or EnviroServe or these companies. They are there then to soak up the spilled material. And then we also like to advise people that you need large plastic bags. And I went to a store the other day and I actually need to change this to 60 micron LDPE plastic bags, because I tested them out. The 40 is not adequate. So a 60 micron is a lacquer thick one. They don't cost a fortune, and you need two sizes. You need the 1.5 by 1 meter one, and you need the smaller ones for the small spill to pick up the spilled material, put it in a bag, seal the bag, and duct tape it, and then put it into your bin. So these are the essential items that must be in your spill kit. So you can tell the farmers, you can order one from some of the co-ops, or order one from a Rapid Spill or Dryzit, one of these companies, or then you can just go and make up your own kit. So what happens when you get a spill in a farm store? And those of you attending my previous lectures will remember I also spoke about decontamination. I'm not going to put it in here, and I'll tell you just now why not. So the first thing, whenever there's a spill, is call the emergency number. So call my number that I can tell you what to do. And I get this call at least twice a week from a retailer or from a depot, a bottle fell over, what do we do now? Because it's strange that when a bottle of yogurt falls over, no one complains. When a bottle of methylated spirit fall over, no complaint. But let a bottle of cypermethrin spill out, then everybody runs for dear life. And very often it's just a stupid reaction. So I will tell you what to do. But the person doing the cleanup is going to have to wear special protective clothing. Not the normal one worn by a spray operator. And while you're working cleaning up the spot in the store, no one else than the person working in that store is supposed to be in the store when cleaning up. So I would like to believe if the farm has a really good store manager, and I've met some of them, and I always applaud them for the way in which they govern their stores. It's fantastic. Is to train the person up to do a spill cleanup properly. So you don't allow them. And then that person would absorb the materials by sprinkling the absorbent material or putting the sausage around it and allow it enough time to soak it up. And if there's any leaking drums or compromised drums or broken drums, you put them into the large polyethylene bag. And if you wonder about the bag being compromised, use 2 bags, use a double bag, right? You seal the bag then with a duct tape and you mark the bag then hazardous waste and you put that then into your poly or your HDPE container or your wheelie bin, right? What you can also do then, after putting your leaking drum into the bin, you sweep up the absorbent material and you clean it up as good as properly as possible. You put that also into a polypropylene bag or the polyethylene bag. You seal the bag with duct tape, you mark it as it waste, and it goes into a drum. Now at least you've taken away 99% of the hazard and the risk on the floor where the spill happened, right? But then you have to do 2 things. You got to call one of the hazmat companies to remove the material for safe disposal. And remember, our rule in the country is now no hazardous waste may go into landfill, so they would have to pick it up and take it for incineration to a place like either a thermal or to Lafarge Cement up in the north. So that's going to cost you a few bucks, unfortunately, but you should have insurance against that. And then I would also like then you to call me to tell you how to decontaminate the place. So the decontamination is a very, very dangerous occupation. It is high hazard. It is extreme risk because you work with chemicals that I'm not prepared now to share with anybody of you. Okay, so I'd rather talk to the farm and see, do we need to do a really high level decontamination or can we just rinse the floor off with something else? And there are different options. That's how I would like to rather guide it on a case-by-case study than giving a general guideline because what we normally advocate is too dangerous for a normal farm operator to work with. So simple. Call for advice when the spill happens, wear protective clothing, soak up the chemicals, secure the compromised containers, pick up all the spilled material that you soaked up with the absorbent material into the polyethylene bags, into your bin, seal them up, get them disposed of by a hazmat company, and you can see there's a link for the companies that CropLife is approved that do the hazmat cleaning up for you. And then you call me up and I'll tell you what to do when you have to really decontaminate. And in the case, in the case of a very toxic chemical, like a paraquat, for example, or like a chlorpyrifos, or like, and not the chlorpyrifos is that toxic, but it creates a very bad odor. There is a very good way of even eliminating the odor from the store because it's unpleasant to work in a place with that stink. But I would like to know what's spilled out and I can give you guidance on what to do there. And sometimes it will be very cheap. Sometimes it might cost a few rand, but I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about the risk for the person having to work with very caustic and very dangerous chemicals. So once you've done that, your farm store is safe to go and no more problems. Now, when you come to the core of the message, so for the farm worker, this is the person that will be working with the chemicals on a day-to-day or a week-to-week basis. What do we tell this particular person? The PPE is something which I am getting flipping grumpy about because I go around the country and I talk to many people and I get calls from farm workers who complain about the fact they don't get PPE. And you know, it bothers me because if I go to most of the co-ops, when I go to some of the big retail stores, like the yellow one that you find all over the country, you can buy PPE kits for next to nothing. And the question is, why don't people use the PPE? It's a case of rather be safe than sorry. And it doesn't have to cost you an absolute fortune. And it is something which, from CropLife SA perspective, is a non-negotiable. And let me just give you an idea of why I'm saying this to you. All the poisoning cases I get in my life where people got exposed to a pesticide or working together is because the people did not wear the appropriate PPE. 100% of them. I'm not talking about the deliberate parasuicide attempts and dogs eating pesticide. I'm talking about getting a splash in the face, getting something in orally, inhaling a pesticide. It's because people didn't wear the correct personal protective clothing. And what you can tell the farm worker is that is not only the acute effect on yourself, in other words, that you might get poisoned now, you might get exposed to, I'm not going to use a particular active, but you might be using a benign chemical that you think is benign. And 30 years down the line, you might have liver cancer. You ask yourself, but why the hell? I don't drink alcohol, I don't smoke, I don't blah, blah, blah. It might be because you didn't wear your proper PPE and you got exposed to the chemical on a day-to-day basis. To give you a practical example, in Brazil, a lot of people die every year from paraquat poisoning, not because they got a paraquat splash in the face, not because they ingested paraquat, but because they spray paraquat with a knapsack spray, which is not totally serviceable. They don't use the right personal protective equipment, and the paraquat leaks onto the body. It is absorbed via the skin. It goes and sits on the peritoneum, on the liver. It builds up in the liver until one day it gets toxic level and the person kills over and the person dies. So there's an example of how a chemical at a low dose builds up over time and starts knocking you out of life completely after a couple of months. And you tell the farm workers that the farmer has a compliance issue to issue with the right PPE when you work with a pesticide. But you as the farm worker, working for the farm and doing the pesticide store or mixing the pesticides or handling the pesticides, spraying them, have a compliance issue also in terms of the Occupational Health and Safety Act to wear the PPE if that is given to you by the farmer. And I got a good friend who's also one of our recyclers in the Western Cape who told me the other day that he caught these two farm workers who he issued the PPE to when they work with empty containers. They were not wearing it. And he posed a penalty on them. And they had to pay a penalty. And he said that was the last time he ever saw them without the PPE. So a farm worker is as compliant in terms of PPE as the farmer himself is. So the farmer is compelled to give, and the farm worker is compelled to wear the PPE. And people tell me, yeah, but it's hot and comfortable. Guess what? Rather be a bit hot and uncomfortable than dying from cancer a couple of years from now or getting seriously poisoned because you did not listen to the good advice given to you by the label and you did not heed to the commands given to you by the label. So the simple reason is we work with hazardous chemicals that can be risky. So we take the risk away by saying, okay, hazardous chemical, I'm going to take paraquat again. And I can tell you paraquat is not something to play with, but you can work with paraquat completely safely if you don't expose your body anywhere to the paraquat, if you use your personal protective equipment. But if you don't do that, believe me, there's going to be a consequence. And the consequences are diverse. There's acute poisoning that I see every day in my life. There's allergic reactions, especially from the pyrethroid, things like the triazole fungicides that cause a lot of respiratory tract irritation. There's dermatitis. If you get constant skin irritation from pyrethroid, you're going to develop dermatitis, and you can ask a dermatologist how damn difficult it is to treat the patient with dermatitis. It becomes near impossible. Liver sclerosis can be from too much alcohol consumption or by being exposed to certain chemicals like certain organophosphates like, for example, chlorpyrifos and methylmidofos. They call liver sclerosis if you get low doses on a day-to-day basis. You can get kidney malfunction from some of the herbicides or from some of the fungicides. Worst of all, you can get cancer You can get DNA mutation, and you can get birth defects in pregnant women if they get exposed to the pesticides, if they don't wear the proper PPE. Okay, but now just take a note here. Pregnant women should not be working with pesticides at all, finish and clock. All right. And then you see the last two there, visual impairment. If you get exposed to organophosphates very often, you are going to lose your sight. To give an example, if you get one exposure to fentanyl, which is now virtually out of the market, there's only one registration left in the market, but you get one exposure to a good dose of fentanyl, you're technically blind for the rest of your life. That's it. Some of the organophosphates have a reversal effect, so it does reverse if you treat the patient with atropine sulfate. But with fentanyl, guaranteed serious to total visual impairment for the rest of your life. And then I've spoken to some of the older people in the old days who were aerial applicators. And those days they were actually wilder than the Wild West. And they all suffer from Parkinson's disease or from other chronic diseases because of the fact they didn't take the precautions to protect themselves by wearing the proper PPE. So it is just not worth the risk if you to work with a pesticide without having the right PPE. And my question there is a rhetorical question you have to ask yourself, and you ask the farm workers. If you do not wear the PPE, what is the possibility of developing one of these particular defects in your body? And you don't have to let them answer you, but I can tell you as a toxicologist, the chances of developing something like this is 100%. Guaranteed. If you don't believe me, call me up later and I'll give you examples of where I saw it happening to people where they got long-term effects from being exposed to pesticide. In my younger days, I worked as a volunteer at a cheetah farm where I did all the sort of weed management, I did the fly management, and I was wearing my proper PPE, like a real proper suit you'll see just now. And even then, I got exposed to low doses of a single isomer pyrethroid. It's so bad for me that my body developed an autoimmune response. So if I get into place and somebody sprayed alpha-cypermethrin or lambda-cypermethrin, lambda-cyhalothrin, or beta-cypermethrin, I get these terrible goosebumps on my skin. So it is there. I'm also a result of maybe not being totally responsible and allowing myself to be exposed to the chemicals. So this is a good idea of what you need in terms of the PPE. And there's a poster, it's on the CropLife SA website for you, of what our little mannequin must wear. And I think it was Elrisa, he might still be in the meeting. We had such a good laugh when our new team started with Rodney and all the other wonderful people we work with now. And Elrisa started putting together all these advocacy documents and all the posts and stuff. And we took the CropLife International poster and we said, okay, let us see what we can use. And I said to Elrisa, but the mannequin on the CropLife International poster had all the PPE, but they never gave him a hat. Now, how stupid can that be? So in other words, you spray pesticide with the visor, with gloves and overall boots, blah, 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 but you don't cover your hat. That was bloody stupid. So we adapted this little poster to South African condition with a lot of extra items there that our international partners never thought about. And that is an example of a person working properly with a pesticide. Okay, so well covered. That's an example of a person working with a very risky situation. He's going to be breathing in those chemicals on a day-to-day basis. And when he gets to the age where I'm at over 60, man, oh man, will he have a couple of problems. I know I've got problems, but that was arming induced. It's not pesticide induced. So you can be smart and you can be safe if you just use your common sense and protect your body, because PPE is not that difficult to obtain. But we tell people, for the spray operator, a nice, lightweight two-piece cotton overall is what you need. They don't cost a fortune. I don't want to punt a particular brand here, but some of you might know the brand. You can see it up at the top there. They make wonderful overalls that don't cost a fortune. And my one I've got is now 10 years old. I still use it. I wash it every now and again. It is still serviceable. So it's always a good idea to buy the spray operator 2 overalls. One can be used, one is washed and dried. And then the next day they take a wash dried one and they wash the other one. So this is essential for a spray operator. We advocate that the person doing the mixing of the pesticides. And I know maybe you think, yeah, but this is bloody overboard. You know, not all the pests are all that dangerous. It's a matter of principle. When you're mixing, you're working with a concentrate. When you're spraying, you're working with a highly diluted solution. So for the mixing, you get the Tyvek or the Tychem full body suit. And I checked the other day, they are not that expensive. You get a good quality one, which is chemically impenetrable for about 180 from a farm co-op or from one of the big retail outlets. Then the cotton hat for a spray operator, not a golf cap, a cotton hat, because a cotton hat has a lacquer white brim. And if the spray drifting down from up onto the person, then the brim would catch it and prevent it from going onto the face and the neck and the throat, which is very thin skin where you absorb the chemicals very rapidly. So cotton hat for a spray operator. Calf length rubber boots for everybody, whether you are the mixer, whether you're a spray operator, and the rubber gloves for everybody. I like personally, when I work with very dangerous chemicals, to use first a set of surgical rubber gloves, and then over that I use my polybutylene or butylene long rubber gloves. This is uncomfortable because your hands sweat like hell, but rather get a bit of sweating than getting yourself exposed to the pesticide. But I would only say this is for the very dangerous stuff, like, for example, some of the organophosphates or something like paraquat. But the least you do is a set of long rubber gloves for the spray operator and for the mixer. Then I also advocate for the mixer that you use a respirator mask with a filter. It's an ABPKE filter that will take up any chemical, any dust, any powder. So there's no chance of the person inhaling any of the solids or the liquids in the concentrated form. And when the person works with a very toxic pesticide, and I'm going to keep on mentioning methylmidofos, because if you spray it, you smell the stuff 4 kilometers away. Or we work with paraquat. You don't want paraquat anywhere into the body. So it's a good idea then for the person to use a respirator mask like that. Now, I'm not saying you use the full visor type of mask. You can use goggles and a respirator over the nose and mouth. But this is the ultimate. That thing costs about 4,000 Rand. It's really worth it if you work with very toxic chemicals. For the normal spray operator, I'm not talking about these El Cheapo made in China dust masks you buy for the COVID. I'm talking about a proper brand like the one over there, which is a proper mask which filters out dust, it filters out the chemicals, and they are basically only used for 1 or 2 days before they're discarded. So that's for the spray operator. And then the duct tape, if you're a mixer, you need to duct tape your trousers and your sleeves over your gloves that you don't get any contamination through those particular ports. And then lastly, proper eye cover. So look around the shops and you will find cheap goggles. They polycarbonate, so they can't break with a stone hitting it or so they're very safe for the eyes. And they've got night breathing ports on the top because that's where people sweat a lot. But if you buy the good ones, man, they only cost 15 or 20 Rand a piece. And what I would also like to advise, and I should maybe put it in my next slide, you get a very nice one with a yellow lens. And it's amazing how the yellow lens takes the strain off the eyes and gives you a better resolution of your picture in front of you. So they cost a bit more. They cost about 90 Rand, but they're also fantastic then for a spray operator to use when they're working in harsh sunny conditions. And then lastly then, for the mixers, I would also like to believe that to prevent any splashing onto the body, even though you're wearing the Tychem or the Tyvek suit, you use a plastic apron. And believe it or not, you don't have to go and buy one. If you have a long polyethylene bag, like the 60 gauge ones or the 60 micron ones I told you about for the spill material, you can make your own plastic apron from that also. So it's just to prevent the body from making any contact with a single molecule of a pesticide. And my dear friends, I believe if you do that, your risk is virtually nothing. Now, this is the sequence. I'm going to go through it quickly on how to put on your clothing. First, your overall and the cotton net, or your suit with the hoodie, like you see this guy's working with me. And that was, I think one of that was me when we worked in Limpopo with the op stocks. Then your boots, and the trousers must be draped over the boot and sealed with duct tape. You never put the trousers inside the boots, because if something is spilled onto the trousers, it runs into the boot. Then you put on your dust mask and your safety goggles, or your breather mask if you have a respirator mask like that. And then your gloves, and you can seal the gloves with a duct tape over the sleeves. They don't go into the sleeves because, again, if the spillage and your gloves or your sleeves are inside the gloves, it runs into the gloves and you've got to discard the gloves. So you put them over the gloves. And lastly then is you can put the, you need to put on the splash apron for people mixing the dangerous stuff, like, for example, a paraquat. Okay, so, and important now, remember the single isomer pyrethroids, lambda-cyhalothrin, alpha-cypermethrin, beta-cypermethrin. These things are very irritating to the skin. So it's best in the case of those for the spray operators to also cover the entire skin, because I get the complaint from them very often. And even from the farmer, we could brand soos die hell. And I know, if you don't believe me, buy yourself a little bottle of alpha-cypermethrin and make up the spray mixture and just give yourself a dash on the wrist and film it back 4 hours later. You're going to burn like mad. So don't take the risk. Protect yourself properly. And I've been onto farms where I walk around and I cannot find a single fault with a single operator. And I say to the farm workers, well done. And they're very proud about the fact that somebody comes and applauds them. But I've been onto farms where there is absolutely no protective clothing whatsoever. And I had a call from a farm worker, and I will never forget him. It's a guy that worked on a farm in Groblersdal. He phoned me up and said, you now got the job of a spray operator in the farm. And when you asked the farmer, but what PPE should I use? The farmer told him, only your 2 hands. So I laid a charge against the farmer with the Department of Labor, and he got one hell of a financial penalty because of that. So the farmer must provide the PPE, the farm worker must use the PPE. And this is the way to take the hazard and make it a 0 risk, or to take the hazard and make it 100% risk if you don't use the PPE. And when it comes to taking the PPE off, this is, it can be quite humorous if you do a practical session with people that never work with pesticides and tell them right now, take the PPE off. But let me not go into all those little anecdotes because they're going to take too much time. So first of all, whether you are the farm store manager working with the pesticides, or whether you're the mixer, or whether you're the spray operator, at the end of your shift, when you're working and you're now stopping your job, you first go and wash the gloved hands thoroughly with soap. And I should have said they're running cold water before taking the PP off, because your gloves and the hands are the ones always in contact with the pesticide. So you decontaminate your gloves first of all. Secondly, after that, you take the plastic apron off if you are the mixer, and you rinse it and you hang it up to dry out. Then you take your hat or the hoodie off. Then you remove your dust mask or your respirator and your safety goggles. And while you're busy with that, you can just as well then rinse your respirator mask if there's anything on the outside. And you can rinse your safety goggles under the water, hang it up to dry out while you're busy with the other stuff. Then if you had to use the duct tape, if you work with a highly toxic pesticide, you remove the duct tape, and then you can take your overall off, and then you take the body cover off. In other words, your overall stuff. And afterwards, you make sure everything is washed and clean at the place. You don't go home with it to wash it there amongst the kids and the wife and children, stuff like this. So you wash it there. It is stored in your own locker at the pesticide store, or then outside in a different store. And I must again say, the one farm where Elisa and I went 2 years ago to make a video about the container management, that farm was super, because they had a little depot outside where everyone who was spray operator owned a locker for the PPE. I was very impressed with that. So that's the way, just to be safe. Now, things that people don't think about. Don't take your PPE home, because remember, it carries a level of contamination. If it's a pyrethroid, maybe not necessarily, but it might be an organophosphate. It might be a carbamate. It might be something that you don't want your people to expose to. And it must be cleaned every day. You don't use the same overall for a week and then wash it, because if you do that, your body will be contaminated with the chemicals that you're not supposed to be in contact with. Okay, and you don't use the PPE for non-pesticide work. So the PPE that you use on the farm is for pesticide work, whether you handle it in the store, whether you apply it on the tractor with a boom spray or the knapsack or you must blow whatever, that is where you use the PPE. It's not for going to service a tractor, finish and clock. And that is the golden rule about the PPE. So take the maximum precaution. And people ask me, but what level of PPE do I need? You know what? Simple answer. Go and check what the label tells you. Some labels will tell you you have to wear a respirator because this is a volatile compound that will poison you if you inhale the fumes. Others will tell you wear a nose and mouth cover. Others will tell you that you would have to use a full mixture. So the label is your golden guide on what is the level of PPE that you require when doing the job. Nothing else. Then when it comes to preparing the spray mixture, and yesterday, I can't remember how it came about yesterday when it was my discussion with Harish or somebody else, where it came out, or it was one of our meetings yesterday, where it came out that the farm workers must decide what to spray. No, the farm worker gets instructions from the farm operator or from a farm manager on what to do, but you tell the farm worker. And I wasn't very happy when I heard yesterday from people saying that the farm workers are literate. My experience was that most farm workers are not as stupid as we think they are. They can read, they can write, they can understand the stuff. So you tell them, ladies and gentlemen, you read the label before you start measuring and mixing. That is very important. Read the whole label because it is your safeguard for yourself. So you take that container and you read the label. If you don't understand the label, you call the farmer and say, please come and explain to me what this label says. If they don't know what to do, call the manager, call the crop advisor, or you call the company, or you can even call my helpline because my number is on most of the labels and of the containers. I will help you out and explain to people what you do. So you've got to read the label, right? Then you ask yourself a couple of very important questions, starting off with the following. Is this product the one that I'm supposed to spray on this crop today for this particular pest or the disease or the weed? And that will be found at the end of the label in directions for use. If not, you do not mix it because it is not the product applicable to the crop. We call it off-label use. That is against regulation 1716. So I've had some farm workers told me, I told my boss, I'm not going to spray because I don't see it on this, but ek sien nie daar goed vir hierdie gif op hierdie houer. And then the farmer phoned me up and the farmer was quite abrupt with me. I told him, but listen to your farm worker. Your farm worker is your guardian angel because he read the label at least that you didn't do. Second thing that you do as a farm worker, you read the warnings and precautions because that will tell you what do I need to do to protect myself and the environment and the people around me. Then you ask yourself, remember, we don't always have water in South Africa that is palatable with the tank mix that you want to make. Clean water might be clean to the eye, but it might not be of the right pH. It might be water with a lot of dissolved salt. So you need to have buffers, you need to have adjuvants, you need to have water softness to make sure that you've got the right water. And then you check what is the mixing sequence. And I unfortunately lost my picture of that wonderful scene in the Western Cape where there were 4 farm workers around the 10,000 liter spray barrels with a cloud of pesticide around them because they poured in the wetting agent first and then both filled up the tank. So there was a massive lot of foaming. The dosage rate is very important, and a lot of people get stuck with that because they can't transform dosage rate per hectare to how much goes into the spray tank, and that is the duty of the farmer to tell them. You today, sitting in our audience here, and many of our crop advisors are here today, and I'm really grateful that you all attend this because I think you are also the guardian angels for us in terms of safe use, is help the guys to work out how much of the chemical in the tank that goes on to how many hectares on the farm. And even I can help you with that because sometimes people just don't understand what goes in there. And that will tell you then how much of the pesticide in terms of the quantity, like how many liters or milliliters or how many kilograms or grams goes into my spray tank for the application. And what the farm worker must ask himself then, going back to one precaution, is the PPE that I have available today suitable for that operation? So how will you know that? You go back to the warning precaution. It will tell you there whether you're right or wrong. And then what you need to also do is, before you start measuring out, make sure you've got a scale. We also call it in scientific terms a balance. You have to have a measuring cylinder or a measuring beaker or a large syringe. You must have the PPE. And I'm very happy to announce today, and I don't want to punt it too much, otherwise you think I work for the company, but there is one of our member companies today present in the audience that made up a totally equipped measuring kit. And if you want to know about that, you can call me or WhatsApp me. I will tell you which company it is, but they've got a fully equipped measuring kit with beakers, with jugs, with PPE, with a balance, with everything you require to measure stuff out properly. And why is that so important? Because you only need to put in that amount of chemical onto the crop as stated by the label. If you put less, you have resistance. If you put more, you have resistance, and you waste the chemical, and you pollute the environment, and you pollute yourself. So measuring out is critically important. So use a proper measuring kit and make sure you decant the right quantity into your spray tank. So before you start doing that, what is forbidden? We all know, Yuresh, and I hope you hear me now, don't even think of smoking, let alone smoke while you work with pesticides. Don't eat while you work with pesticides. Don't drink any beverages. No Coca-Cola, not like me. I drink coffee every half an hour of my life. Don't drink anything, because why? Your mouth is the most guaranteed avenue of a pesticide into the body, going to the liver and giving you liver cirrhosis. So do not take the chance, and do not smoke, eat, or drink while you work with pesticides. And again, do yourself a favor. The agents have the privilege of driving around the country. They see the farm worker, they see the farms. Just look around. How many times do you see a spray operator on a tractor or walking with a knapsack with a Zol in the mouth? Just stop there. Walk up to the guy and say, hey, Wood, listen, you're taking a chance here. You are going to poison yourself. Don't do it. And you'll be amazed at the positive response you get. And I've done it a couple of times in my life. And it turned out that I sit down eventually and I share my flask of coffee with the guy, and we have a lekker chat. So just tell people, don't be nasty. Just tell them it's not a good idea, because we don't want you to get poisoned because you smoke and you eat your drink and you get the pesticides into your body. Okay? Because you work with contaminated hands. So the correct thing to do is to plan your spray day in the morning before you start working. So you eat a proper breakfast. You drink enough water that you don't become dehydrated. And when you're done, then you remove all the PPE, you wash your hands and your face, then you can eat and drink as much as you want. And I wouldn't even advocate that you smoke, but if you have to smoke, then you can do it. So you can do those things after you work on the stuff. What about ablutions? What do you have to go to the tree? The best is then also remove the PPE, wash your hands in the face, use the toilet, fit your PPE back, and continue with your job. And people say, yeah, CropLife, you go overboard. Yeah, we go overboard. Why? Because we care about people's health, we care about the environment, and we care about our crop safety. Because if you don't even do this for yourself, how do we know that the farmers apply the chemicals on the crops properly and we don't end up with excessive residues in the crops? So personal protection is a platform for responsible use throughout the chain, until the point where I buy my broccoli from a food outlet and know this was done by a good farm worker with good PPE. You don't have to worry about the chemical residues. 100% happy. So these things to me are important. And I can tell you why I'm so passionate about this, because I've handled too many poison cases in my life. And the saddest for me is when I get a call from a farm and the farm worker got badly poisoned. It is just not worth it not to wear the PPE. When it comes to the decanting, this is a hazardous occupation, especially when you work with a 20-liter container. And I've got two pictures up here to show you what is good practice and what is poor practice. So look at this guy, the old lasso container. It has a spout. which helps a bit to prevent that splashing or the gluk effect. But you try now with a normal 20-liter container to pour it out without splashing. I can guarantee you it is impossible. So you've got to be very careful. Now, if you look at this picture over there, that's a syringe made by one of our CropLife SA members, and I can't even remember who it was. I don't know, Rod, can you remember who this company is? I bought myself 2 or 3 of them. It's a 600 ml syringe that you can use to suck up the required volume from a 2-liter container, so there's no chance of a gluk or a splash. So I would strongly recommend that you consider buying one of these. And if you compare the 2 operators here, they are both fully clad with a PPE, which is actually wonderful. So this is then the mixer on the farm. Okay, so that mixer has a problem because a 20-liter container always has a splash. This guy is handling, I think it looks to me like about a 5 or a 10-liter container. You turn the container on the side, and that will help you to prevent the splash effect, even though not 100%, at least it helps you then to prevent the splash effect. And you measure it out into a beaker before you go into the tank. Now, why this guy is pouring the lasso into the tank, I don't know, because there's no measurement. It's just pouring it, like the farmer told me when I worked in the farm in Lewu, just pour until the mixture is white. That is your dose that you apply to the macadamia trees. And I will never forget that day in my life where I heard that from a farmer. So you measure out into your beaker, you mix with water into your spray tank, and then you rinse your measuring jug out, and you pour it back into the tank. So this is good practice. What you must do when you work with powders or granules is don't work in windy conditions. So where I live in Klaberga, we often have winds exceeding 85 km an hour. In the Western Cape, the winds can pump the 45 knots very easily. So you don't work with a powdery substance in a windy condition. So especially when you work with methanol 900 SP, I know it comes in a waterable soluble sachet, but even the sachet can make a bit of a powdery dust. So be very careful when you work with that sort of stuff, and take care when you pour the stuff out. Now, luckily for us, I can see many of our member companies are moving over into these new types of containers with a container with a breathing valve at the back. So before you open the main cap there, you break the seal on the breather valve, you open that, and you can pour the stuff out without a single splashing effect. Other companies have an integrated breathing port in the handle, which I also tried out and tested, which also works like a dream. So I see our companies have taken this thing to heart when I spoke about this 8 or 9 years ago. And now we start getting these containers in the market and make it easier for the mixer to pour the container or the container's contents into a measuring beaker or a flask without making a big splash. So that is actually wonderful. So they do cost a bit more than the normal El Cheapos you get on the market, but they make life easier and they take the risk away from the person who is busy decanting it into a measuring flask. So it stops all the spilling, and obviously also the hazard is there, but the risk is virtually zero with these sort of things. And I did a training session for the Galila Kakushle from UPL guy about 5 years ago when we trained him up to be a trainer. And I took a 20-liter drum and a 5 and a 10-liter drum without these special ports. And I did a test, him and myself and Quaid, who's the national warehouse manager for UPL. And none of us could pour them out without making a splash. So I'm very happy to see that our members, the supply members, are now making use of these wonderful new containers, because they just prevent that risk from materializing when you work with a large type of containers. Then the spray tank filling sequence. We've had a request from our members to have a general statement for all labels on what is the mixing sequence. That is dangerous because technically you cannot always do the filling up in the same sequence. But as a sort of guideline for people is to check not the sort of guideline, the only guideline is check the label for the mixing sequence. Now, unfortunately, not all labels have the mixing sequence on that, because many products are made to match with the mixing partner. For example, Mancozeb and azoxystrobin for black called black spot and citrus. It tells you got to mix the two, and you got to mix the mineral oil. So which goes in first? So as I would rather call it a thought process, not a guideline, because that is the only guideline. The mixing sequence should be the first is to fill your tank, whatever the size, with 2/3 of the water in the spray tank. And obviously you've done your calculations now to decide what goes in first or how much goes in there. Then your buffers and safeness to make sure the water is now compatible with what you put into the tank. And I heard again a week or two ago when I went out on a tour with farmers with IntelliGrow, the very great importance of making sure that your water is compatible. A lot of our water is heavy with the minerals. A lot of our water has got a very high pH or a very low pH. If you don't adjust it, it's not going to work. Then after that, any dry formulations, you agitate them well to get them dissolved or get them suspended in the formulation or in the spray mix. Then the ECs, the SCs, and the crop oils, again, you agitate very well. And these seldom, if ever, make any foam. Then the water-soluble formulations. Then the wetting agents, but you keep the ladle away, so you don't start mixing up because you make a lot of foam. And then you slowly top up the tank to the full volume and to avoid any foaming. And you put the lid or the screw cap on top of the spray tank. And then with a movement with the backpack or with a movement with the tractor, that agitation will then make a uniform mixture with you. And this is like a thought process. But I'm going back to say, how do you know? The label should tell you what is the mixing sequence of this particular chemical in my spray tank. Okay, so again, tell the farm workers, lees the etiquette, check the label. It is your safeguard against a mishap. Things that you have to look out for. And again, the farmer might not be at the particular point of application, or the farm manager might not be there. The store manager is not supposed to be there. So things that may not be there while you're busy spraying pesticides. I'm just going to go and run through them a lot quickly because I think it is common sense. No spectators. People like to come and stop at the road to see what's going on with the tractor or where there's an aircraft flying. Livestock are incredibly nosy. They like to walk up there. Even some of the wildlife come up and walk up. Pets, you don't take your dog with you when you go and spray. You chase all the chickens and the ducks and the geese away. And the children, most definitely nowhere close to any crop field when you work on a crop field, not at all. Pregnant women, I should put them in as well, not at all when you work with a pesticide. And please, for God's sake, look after the bees. I got a call yesterday from a farmer who asked me, what do I do with my bees? Because they said they're going to spray pesticides. I said, but you better scatter for 3 days, take yourself and your bees and go far away because you're going to lose all the bees if you don't take them away from the site. So these are things that I would have thought will be common sense for people, but common sense is not as common as people think it is. So make sure no animals, no bees, no birds, no people, nothing. And you won't believe it, but I saw an article in one of the ag magazines, I think towards end of last year, one of these so-called organic farms where they use ducks and geese to control the pests in the vineyards. But they mentioned in the same word or in the same article how they treat the vineyard trunks with a particular pesticide to control the ants. And I thought to myself, yes, where is the organic part of your farming? So you've got ducks and geese operating in the vineyard, but you use a pesticide there to control the ants. So it was quite a laugh to see how people shot themselves in the foot. They didn't even know that. So nothing alive in the area where you apply the pesticide apart from yourself and the person working with you on the tractor. In many cases, with these huge tractors, the operator will take, or the driver will take somebody with him to help him to adjust the boom and to make sure all the nozzles are working. That's fine. But that person on the tractor with you, that's your spray companion or your partner, must also be wearing all the PP, every single bit of the PP, because he will be exposed to the pesticides as much as you are. You also tell the farm worker to check that the weather is okay to be applying the pesticides. And I'm not going to go into too much depth because there's too much information that we need to go into, and I do more of that in the advanced course at Stellenbosch University. And Chris, I think you attended, no, did you attend the meeting? I think you attended that meeting, yeah. So, so the sky must be sunny for I would say hopefully 6 hours, but at least 4 hours, because most of the pesticides bind onto the surface within 4 hours. You must only apply after the dew has evaporated, otherwise the pesticide don't bind to the target surface and it might be diluted to the point of being ineffective. The best temperature is between 10 and a max of 30 degrees Celsius. If it's below 10 degrees Celsius, there's a chance of this, what we call the temperature inversion, where there's no movement of the air and the pesticide nebulous hangs in the air and it drifts up to 20 kilometers off the target. So optimal is 22 to about 28 degrees Celsius, but you can work down as low as 10, but nothing more than 30 degrees Celsius, because above 30 degrees Celsius, the problem is also that the fine droplets might vaporize and release the pesticide up in the air before they hit the target where they're supposed to be. Our labels will also talk about windy conditions. And our principle is in pesticide application that you need a bit of wind because it helps to deposit the pesticide spray mixture onto the target. But you never work above 15 kilometers per hour with the normal pesticide because of drift, possibly damaging the environment, other crops, people, livestock, wildlife, etc. there. But when it comes to glyphosate, you'll see the labels say not over 10 km per hour because glyphosate is a non-selective systemic herbicide. And the past 4 years, I've seen enormous claims amounting to literally hundreds of millions of rands where people apply glyphosate in high wind, drifting over non-GMOs and wiping out crops completely. So the climate must be, your gut feel must tell you, yes, it's okay to spray, or no, it's not. And I remember going down the Western Cape where the wind was pumping at 45 km an hour and people were applying it. And there was more chemical on the national road than on the vineyard itself. So just look out for the right weather conditions. So I'm going to just show you a couple of good practice and a couple of bad practices. And because we don't have the ability to talk to me today, I'm just going to go through them. If you look at this guy, you should give him a no because he is not doing the application correct because his PPE is incorrect. If you look at this guy, he's okay, but he doesn't have a glove, so it's about 90%. If you look at this person doing spraying with a nebulizer, 100%. If you look at this guy in a tractor with a pressurized hood, 100%, no chance contamination. If you look at this guy, no PPE, lack a big risk. If you look at this old uncle in Ukraine making the wheat that comes in our bed every day, not a good idea because the uncle doesn't have PPE. And if you look at this, this is what I like to call the buddy system on a farm, where there's somebody helping you to put on your PPE appropriately. That is wonderful. So again, there's never a farm worker on his own on a farm. It's always a team of them working. So have a buddy system where you help each other to put on the PPE and make sure you are fully clad in the right PPE before you start doing your application of the pesticide. It goes back to the principle of we don't want a single molecule of pesticide on or in the body, which is not supposed to be there. And it can be done. I can tell you I've worked with op stock recovery. I think it was 1, 2, 3, 4 times in my life. And in total, I work with over 1,400 tons of pesticides. Never, ever any sign of anything happened to me because I had to wear that space kit. It was extremely uncomfortable. But to me, the discomfort was worth it because I knew if I made one mistake and I got that paraquat onto me, that would have been tickets for me and I wouldn't have worked for CropLife SA. So take care of yourself, very important. Then after working with the pesticides, you've taken all the PPE off. The hand washing is very important. But people say, but I wore my gloves. Why do you need to wash my hands? It's a matter of principle. It's like stopping at every stop street and stopping at every red robot. Doesn't matter whether they're cars or not. Doesn't matter it's 12 o'clock at night. You wash the hands. And you wash them with soap and cold water. 30 seconds in the palms. 30 seconds on top of the palms, on top of the hands. 30 seconds in between the fingers. And 30 seconds under the nails. And you rinse them off. That way your hands are completely decontaminated 100%. So cold water and soap, not hot water, because hot water opens the pores. And if there's any pesticide there, it can actually be absorbed by the pores very easily. After that, you wash the face and you wash the head and you wash the back of the neck and you wash the throat also, because that is often where the contamination comes from, because people don't wear a total facial visor or a facial mask. So you also use cold water and soap. And people say, yeah, but it's bloody cold in the winter. So what? It's a 30-second process. You're not going to die if you use a bit of cold water for 30 seconds. So you wash the face properly with cold water and soap. And people want to know, what is gentle soap? Right? You don't use something like the typical boer soap or sunlight soap. It's too rough. You use something like Dove, or you use something like these palm olive soaps, the soft soap that people use in a normal bath. That's the good stuff. And advisable for the spray operator to go and take a cool shower after work and wash the entire body off. And I do believe that if we follow these principles, then spray operator can operate for 40 years without ever developing any chronic or acute symptoms in his body or her body at all. So the principle is that you take any possible contamination off the body by following these safety guidelines. And I'm going to again stress, don't take the PPE home. It must be clean at your workplace. It must be left in the store in your own secure locker. And don't share your PPE with other people, because you don't know whether the other spray operator cleaned his or her PPE properly. So we put up that little mannequin that says safety first. So safety first for the spray operator and for the person mixing and for the store manager is of paramount importance. There's no case of, yeah, maybes. In pesticide science, there's no maybes. It's a yes or a no. You're either safe or you're not safe. And I know, ask me how many calls I get. 3,500 calls per year with poison cases, because people, they say, yes, but maybe. And that's when I get the call. My eyes are burning like hell because I sprayed alpha-cypermethrin and the wind blew it into my face. And I preach to them in different languages, and I tell them what an idiot they are not to wear a facial visor when they work on the stuff. So don't take the chance and not doing the stuff safely. So once you've protected yourself, I'm happy that the farm worker has done the right thing for him, for herself, because I say again, to me, a farm worker is a farmer's most valuable asset in the farm, because he or she is the person that brings the crop from the field onto the plate of the consumer and makes the farmer the money. But there's a lot of other additional things that you should actually educate and make the farm workers aware about. What happens after you've done all the stuff? And it's not necessarily in time sequence with the previous types of things I spoke to you about. So our empty containers, we all know by now, and if people don't know by now, then I don't know from which planet they are, but we've had the principle of triple rinsing in CropLife SA for the past 15 or 16 years. So every type of container must be cleaned and nominally cleaned before going back into recycling. You may not use any type of empty packaging for anything else, for drinking water, for your homemade beer, for cooking oil, for making your drinking trough for your cattle. It must be triple-rinsed, it must be punctured, it must be going for recycling. If you look on our website, we've got our poster in 6 official languages. There is no reason people can say, I did not know. If you did not know, then your IQ is probably less than that of a slug in the garden. So it's there for you to use, right? So again, I'm going to say, never use an empty container or an empty bag for any other purpose or give it away. And one of our colleagues who works for one of our distribution companies up in the Purple Province said to me, she got a global gap farmer, and she's also a recycler. And I'm not sure she's on our call today. I don't see her name here. But I speak to her now and again because it's nice to hear all the things that she told me about the farmers doing. She said to me, she asked the farmer, can I come and pick up your empty containers? She said, no. I give them to the farm workers for the drinking water. I said, you go to her now and tell him, I'm going to lock him up for 40 years without food if it happens again, because we're not supposed to do it, because there's always a risk of contamination and a potential poison. Then in terms of the new articles of the Waste Management Act and the Waste Management Regulations, it is illegal to burn or to bury an empty container or a bag in the environment, because it pollutes the environment, it produces toxic fumes. And I can tell you, there are cases in the Free State where some of our mega farmers still burn a mountain of empty pesticide containers. And I know Rod can attest to that. I went to the Greens Corporate. They say they're waiting for me to report something like this because they are going to lock them up. What you also must never do, and I've seen it in Losco Valley, where late afternoon when I drive out Losco Valley back to Joburg, there's half full containers standing in the field waiting for the next day's spray operator. That lands in the hands of the criminals, and that is then used by them to poison cattle, to poison dogs, or even to poison people. So they must go back to the store where they belong. Your containers, triple or spray rinse. When it's a bag, you turn the bag inside out, you spray rinse the bag over the spray tank. You puncture the container or the bag to make it unusable for any other purpose, and you take it to a recycler, which is certified by CropLife SA. And currently we stand at about 187 in the country, and there's no reason why any container should not go back into recycling. Okay, if you don't want to take it to the recycler on that particular day, you can keep a separate place in the farm. And I do know many farmers stock them up and then they call the recycling and say, can you come and collect? Or some of them just pick it up in their own bucket and take it out there. And we would like to request you all to tell them, do not make use of recycling that is not CropLife SA certified, because they do not abide by our code of conduct, by our principles, and by the statutes of the country. So we certify only those recyclers that abide by our law. And I'm glad to say to see today that many of the names that are present here today, some of our crop advisors, are those that actually participate in our recycling of empty containers. So thank you, guys and girls. I think it's wonderful. So there you have it. This is what we need to do. The right thing to do: rinse, puncture, dry out, recycle. Simple as that. And the wonderful thing about that, if we all do that within the CropLife family and all our clients do it out there, we create jobs and an income for other people. I worked out the other day, the minimal amount of money that is made at the primary recycling level from our containers beyond the country is 137 million rand that people make a living out of. I'm not talking about the secondary, where there are companies that have 75 employees that they pay on an annual basis. And there's companies using waste pickers to go and collect containers. So there's literally, I would say, nearly 200 million rand of money that other people make out of our pesticide containers coming off the farms. And this is because CropLife took the decision 12 years ago that we will actually go and make a plan to make sure all our empty containers come off the farm and go back into recycling. So where do we find information? It's on the CropLife website. If you open up the CropLife SA website, you will see this little bullet on the top right hand which says container management. If you click on that, we have our latest edition of all the recyclers in the country on the website there. It's listed by province. If you go onto the list, it's about, I think it's nearly 60 pages now. So you click on the province, it opens up the province list with you, gives you the name of the company, it gives you the contact person, it gives you the region, it gives you a cell phone number. It also gives an email address. So no farmer can tell me that they can't get rid of the containers. And wonderful to see is that even some of the farm workers, they have the responsibility of contacting the recycler and getting rid of the containers, which I think is fantastic. So tell the farm workers, your job as the farm worker, the spray operator, to triple rinse, puncture, put in the store, contact the recycler, and get the stuff off the farm. And what our list also offers is not just the list of all the recycling, but there's also a lot of other information on how to decontaminate every type of packaging and how to recycle the stuff properly according to the laws. Because CropLife South Africa has a mandate now in terms of the Waste Management Act and the new EPA regulations to make sure every container comes back from the farm or from the homeowner back into recycling. We are registered as a product responsibility organization under the EPA regulations, and we have to make sure that every container comes back into the network for recycling. And then if you go a bit down from getting this list there, we've got a protocol for every type of container, for plastic containers, for glass containers, aluminum containers, for polypropylene bags, for HDPE containers, for the PET containers that we have to incinerate, which we can't recycle, and for foil bags. So for every type of packaging that the farmer can use, we have a cleaning protocol to make it nominally empty. Nominally empty, it means it is 99% empty. There's nothing left of significance, and it can be transported by normal road transportation. You don't need a special license for that. So please hammer this down the farmers and make sure they recycle all the containers. And you can warn them that CropLife is going to get nasty with people that burn empty containers from the farm, because it is unlawful. It creates environmental pollution, and you take the livelihood away from people that make a life out of our empty containers. And just to tell you what I told our colleagues in Africa, Middle East the other day. Give me a second. Just my coffee going down. We only put about maybe 6,000 tons of HDP into the market every year. The market demand of the recycling industry is 200,000 tons of HDPE per year. So there's no reason why a single pesticide container on the farm should lie there unattended. It must go back into recycling. So please go and look at these things. It's all there for you. It's in the public domain. Very soon we're going to load up for the pest control operators their own set of guidelines on how to treat their particular packaging and take it to their particular recycler. So it's all in your face. And don't tell me you didn't know. It's been going on for the past 12 years. It's also important for that spray operator to clean his or her spray equipment, because it is their job and their livelihood. If that sprayer breaks, then the farmer can say, but you broke the sprayer, so you're liable for the sprayer. So make sure you clean the stuff properly. And I put that little face up there to show you this guy's now busy cleaning a sprayer. He doesn't have long sleeves. He doesn't have his proper head and stuff covered. So he is not acting properly. He should have had his full PPE kit on while tripping into containers and while cleaning his sprayer, because the sprayer is still contaminated with pesticides. And it goes back to the principle I told you, not one molecule may enter the body. Don't talk about dilution and stuff to me. I'm saying to you, not one molecule of pyraclostrobin or methomol or boscalate, whatever, may enter your body. Therefore, you wear the PPE while you're busy cleaning your spray equipment. And the worst you can do is to leave a spray mixture overnight in a spray tank, because the next day you might be sick and the farmer doesn't know what's left in that spray mixture. And he tells the guy, okay, go spray it on the wheat. It might be herbicide. It also damages your equipment. So remember, many of our herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides can be corrosive to the units or the parts of the sprayer, like, for example, the brass or the rubber linings inside and so on. So if there's any leftover spray mixture, which I hope you don't have as farmers, or you guys that are the advisors of the farmers, if there's any leftover spray mixture, the best is to go and spray it out over a fallow piece of soil on your crop area or on a farm road, because you don't spray it out again over your treated area, because then you do a double dosing and you create resistance. So you spray it out, you trip it into your tank, you spray that water out over the fallow soil or over a dirt road. And in some cases, it will tell you, for example, like the hormonal types of herbicides, like halosulfuron-methyl, metsulfuron-methyl, things like those, that you have to use a commercial decontaminant to break down any of the compound that might be left in a pipe or wherever. Because I can tell you, if you spray halosulfuron-methyl or metsulfuron-methyl with a spray tank and you don't rinse it out properly, and you go with that same tank a couple of days later with insecticide, and you hit a plant or a crop, there's going to be absolute havoc, because those things act at the hormonal level. So it triggers a hell of a chain reaction in the plant. So use it, do it the right way, and make sure when you, at the end of your day's work, that your sprayer is completely decontaminated and completely clean. Once you've done that, you check your sprayer. And it doesn't matter whether you work with a knapsack, a boom spray, a SEMA spray, or these new high boys with all the automatic devices. You check every pipe. You check every nozzle to make sure the nozzle is not blocked or worn out. Now, the older brass nozzles, they wear out after a while. The new ceramic nozzles last much longer. You check the valves. You check that your seals are proper. You check that your, your pressure gauges are working properly. And if not working properly, then you fix them or you replace them. Because if you have a broken pressure gauge, how do you know what the pressure is in that tank? In other words, you're going to be applying the wrong droplet size that will not be deposited onto your target. It might drift off and might damage somebody else's crop a couple of kilometers away from the farm. So every part must be checked and replaced if necessary. So that's something I think where the spray operator plays a key role in maintaining a valuable asset for the farmer. But the farmer must also be open-minded enough to understand that when the spray operator says, I need your help for me to check my sprayer and to make sure it's all functional or help me to replace the stuff, that's important because these things cost a bloody fortune. What we then advocate also is in order to vaporize any possible fumes that might be left, is you take the sprayer's lid or cap off and you park it in your store out of direct sunlight, because direct sunlight is something which decomposes plastic after a while, believe it or not. But if you leave your sprayer in direct sunlight every day of your life, that sprayer won't last for longer than 2 or 3 years because the plastic which they use for the spray barrels will break down after a while because of the sunlight. So put it in the store, you keep the cap off, it will vaporize any fumes, and then you've done the right thing and you've secured the long-term lifespan of your sprayer, and it won't cost you again a fortune to replace anything like that. Like I said with this person there, not a good idea to not wear your PPE, because what happened if there was a volatile chemical in that thing like a methamphetamine? You'll be in trouble. What happens if there was paraquat in there, gets onto the skin? It might not do much now, but I don't know whether you've seen what paraquat does to the skin. You get 3rd-degree burns, or if you get no burns, it absorbs the skin. Tomorrow, the day after, and 18 months from now, you start getting liver cancer because you're exposed to paraquat. So don't take the chance. PPE until you've cleaned everything off, and then you decontaminate yourself and clean your body. Okay, then last thing before you close today's work off, you seal all the containers with their own screw caps, or you seal all the bags, you close them with duct tape. And it does happen, my dear friends, that because we work with containers, we work on a farm and we work with water, that sometimes a label is compromised. So if the label is compromised in the container, you get the label of the same product, of the same batch, and you get the farmer to make a colored photocopy. And I think they all have these photocopies in the farm. And you put that photocopy label in a Ziploc bag onto the container with duct tape and make sure it is in the same batch of the pesticide in the farm. And that is the container that you use tomorrow, because now the label is not 100% anymore. Okay, so that's something that you can do just to secure something with a compromised container. And then you put them back on the place in the store. You complete the spray records, and the spray record completion is something between the farmer, the spray operator, and the depot of manager, or the store manager, because the store manager is going to see what did I book out today, what did I get back in my store. The farmer must check, did I spray the correct dosage and the correct product on my plant today, or do I need to follow up with something else? So all of these people have to work together to make sure that you do the right thing in terms of keeping a record of your stocks and keeping a record of what was applied on my crop, because you have to provide then to Global Gap the evidence that you did the right spray program on your crops. And again, lastly, always going to be, make sure you decontaminate yourself and your PPE, and you put your PPE in your own trunk or your own locker, and then you can close off the day's work and you're hunky-dory to go home, not before the time. And I do know, I've seen myself in many places, the farm workers at the end of the day, they park the tractor, someone there out in the open, they walk back home, and I ask myself, when am I going to get the call from this family and say, my child or my children were poisoned because I didn't clean myself? The last section for today to close off is about exposure to pesticides. Now, I don't like to talk about this, but it's necessary because it happens. And I can tell you, luckily, that it happens less on the farm than what it happens in the typical homestead in a suburban area in most parts of our country. But nevertheless, let's go through it. A very golden rule for all of you, please. It goes from Rod through myself to all of you, your company heads, you as an advisor, you as a farmer, you as a manager, is that pesticide poisoning may result in the death of the person if you don't follow the right protocol. Okay? Or if the person doesn't die because of not following the right protocol, it might have long-term health effects on the person. And I've seen people in my life, I don't want to mention too many of the cases, that have very serious health effects after being exposed to pesticide either once or continuously and not taking care of themselves. So pesticide poisoning is always regarded as a serious condition with a patient. And I sit with a case where I get the calls late night that somebody had a dermal contamination during the day, and now the skin is completely red and inflamed, and it is too late to know to do anything about this. So rather take the matter as always serious. Doesn't matter whether you had a paraquat exposure or a cypermethrin exposure or a venomous exposure or whatever. Treat every case as permanently important because it's the long-term survival of the patient. And what you must also understand is, I'm a chemist, I'm a toxicologist, I'm not a pharmacist, nor a paramedic, nor a medical doctor, nor am I a nurse. But you consult me because I can tell you what is the prognosis for the patient, what must be done with the patient. I talk to the paramedics, I talk to the doctors and the nurses, but I may not treat the patient because the only person that may treat the poisoned patient is a healthcare professional council registered person, like a medical doctor. You see the doctor there, you see the nurse there. They are allowed to treat the poisoned patient. The person in the ambulance who's a paramedic, who's registered with our professional council, or the 911 helicopter, or the 124 helicopter, they are qualified to do it. I might know how to do it. I may not do it. And the same goes for you. If somebody's poisoned the farm, don't try to do remediation on the farm for the person. Don't try to treat the patient. You're not allowed to do it. I'm not allowed to do it. I often get the question from people, but tell me, what can I give the patient? I tell them, I'm sorry. I'll tell you which hospital to go to. I'll phone the doctor up, and I phone the doctor. I tell the doctor the patient had this exposure. That is the risk. That's the prognosis. That's the diagnosis. That's the treatment. Get on your horse and start doing the treatment. I do not tell people what to do because if you're not registered with a health professional council in Africa, you're not allowed to treat a patient. And you can tell people why not. Because if you treat a patient that was poisoned or exposed to a pesticide and the patient died, automatically you are up for culpable homicide. That's the finishing line. That's what the law says. So what happens in the case of an exposure? Now, exposure might mean it might be a light dermal exposure. It might be inhalation. It might be somebody who got a splash in the mouth. And I get a lot of calls about people that deliberately drink a pesticide for what we call a suicide attempt, which is always fatal, or a parasuicide, where the person doesn't die but get adverse health effects after a while. So the first thing you do when somebody has an exposure, you call the poison center immediately. There's my number, that 4468946, or you call the Tygerberg Center. That's on 24/7. So we are on 24/7 for that emergency call to tell you what to do with the patient. And what irritates the hell out of me is when I get the call and people tell me, no, we will somewhat treat the patient ourselves at home here, and we gave the patient already some milk to drink. That is the worst thing in the world you can do, because milk is a phase transfer agent. It helps the body to uptake the chemical faster through the gut contents, or faster from the gut contents into the stomach one, than when you don't give the patient milk. So I always tell people, you do not give the patient anything to drink or anything to eat unless I know for a fact it's safe to give the person just a bit of water to drink. And you do not induce vomiting. Now, many of the people say, we want to let the person vomit. No, you don't induce vomiting. Can I give you an example of why? Because some of our chemicals are neurotoxins. So all the organophosphates, all the carbamates, the neonics, they all basically neurotoxins. And what they do is they actually affect the central nervous system. And if you induce vomiting in a patient of which the central nervous system is depressed, the person might asphyxiate that vomitus into the lungs. And then I can tell you that person is dead in half an hour. Not from the chemical, but from stopping all the blocking all the alveoli with the vomitus. So you do not induce vomiting unless instructed by the poison center to induce vomiting to the patient. If the poison center tells you to evacuate the patient to a hospital immediately, don't argue. I get these arguments day to day. Yeah, but we don't have time now. If I tell you, put the patient in your car and get to the hospital because the ambulance service is too slow, you do it now because the patient can still be saved. And I'm happy to report that if we get the person to the hospital, seldom, if ever, apart from paraquat, the patient all survived because the doctors and nurses are there. They might not know what to do, but I can help them to treat the patient and get them remediated without any long-term consequences. Okay, so while you're waiting for the transport, you take the person away from the place where the poisoning happened, because it might have been exposure to a spill, or the patient might have drunk something or something like this. Take them away. If they contaminated clothing, you take it off, put on clean clothing for the person, and you take the person to the hospital. And it's always a good idea to take the container with the label or the STS with the patient to the hospital. Okay, because some of the doctors know a lot, some of the doctors know very little, but at least the doctors know how to check on the safety data sheet and to see what is the treatment and what is the risk for the patient. And what I very often do is I phone the hospital before and I tell them the patient on the way. And I discuss with the doctors and the nurses what to do. And you'll be amazed on, well, I hope you don't repeat my words, but the nurses are often better versed in the treatment and care of such a patient than the medical doctor, because they are the ones that get the patients first. So you get a good nurse, the patient is in very good hands. And I'm going to repeat myself here. You do not attempt self-remediation. It's only people that are registered by the Medical Council of South Africa that may treat the poisoned patient. Otherwise, you might do the wrong thing and the patient might die in your hands, and then you're going to be in serious, serious trouble. So don't take the chance. Let me give you some example of the typical types of symptoms. And the symptoms are not necessarily in any chronological order. But salivation is something we find with quite a few of the pesticides. But when they take paraquat or diquat, there's massive salivation. Nausea with organophosphates and carbamates is guaranteed. Paraquat and diquat guaranteed. And there's excessively dangerous with paraquat, because if they vomit and that vomitus goes into the lungs, that patient has got 10 minutes before the patient expires completely. Vomiting, you can see also, vomiting is very often severe with organophosphates, a bit less with the carbamates. It's severe with the paraquat and the diquat. So if the patient starts vomiting, you need to support the patient to make sure the body has been formed that there's no chance of absorbing the vomitus into the lungs. Dizziness, no dizziness with paraquat and diquat. A bit of dizziness with amidine like amatraz. The neonics, you've got to drink a lot of neonic before you get dizzy. With the pyrethroids, very seldom, unless you really take a liter of a 25% deltamethrin. But with the organophosphates and the carbamates, the dizziness sets in very, very rapidly. It can be as quick as 3 minutes after the exposure that you start getting dizzy, depending on the particular type of molecule. The headaches, yep, also profound with organophosphates and with some of the carbamates, not so much with the others. Abdominal pains, you look at that. If people tell you, I've got very, very serious stomach pains, it is very often a case of paraquat or diquat ingestion. The visual impairment, not as bad with the carbamates, but with the organophosphates, they very quickly tell you, but I see 6 objects in front of me that all look the same. That is a sign of a severe organophosphate poisoning. And also because of the fact that these things are very heavy on the central nervous system, the breathing becomes very labored and becomes very shallow, and they find difficult to breathe. So most patients that die from organophosphate or from the carbamate is because the diaphragm becomes completely paralyzed and they simply cannot breathe, absorb sufficient oxygen. The pulse rate also becomes erratic. It can go down as low as possibly 35 for some people with these two chemicals, organophosphate carbonates. It can also rise up to 210. Now, if you're a medical or know something about medicine, if your pulse rate goes over 210, you're in very serious trouble. So anything up to 160 can still be tolerated, but anything over 160 starts becoming dangerous for people. Temperature fluctuations are quite normal for the carbonates and obese, but I find it's mostly temperatures get lower. In other words, the person suffers from hypothermia instead of hypothermia. So the hypothermia temperature dropping down to 34 instead of the normal 37 or 60 or 36.7 for the body temperature. It can sometimes go up to about 41, which is dangerous for people. Shivering and tremors in high doses for these two ones, and then for the neonics, also shivering, especially if you drink a lot of imidacloprid. I've seen with a patient that shivers like hell, and then people become comatose rapidly with a high dose of this. And look at this with the amidine, with amitraz. They become rapidly comatose within half an hour, and when they become comatose with amidine, the prognosis is 100% negative, so they all die after that. And look at this one, the burning mouth with a pyrethroid, hell of a burn in the mouth. Paraquat and diquat, basically they digest the soft tissue in the mouth. The glyphosate, if you get any contact with the glyphosate on your mouth, you will feel your lips and your tongue and everything goes completely numb. And when people tell me that, I know it was a mishap with a glyphosate type of formulation. And look at that, all of these cause to a greater or a large extent some burning in the mouth. So this is the gravity of the symptoms you get with these particular pesticides. Now, some of the pyrethroids, they only actually cause an irritation. It's not really a poison. So it's an allergic response, which can reverse quite easily with a good cortisone or a good antihistamine, or with something else that I tell people on the phone, which I'm not going to tell you now, but you don't have to worry about it much. But if I get a case where I know people swallowed paraquat or they swallowed one of the carbonates or organophosphate, and then you've got to be very careful with the patient. Unfortunately, with a paraquat, if you swallow more than 30 ml of paraquat, your chance of survival is virtually null. It's all the patients die. And we get those increasingly more in South Africa, and we don't understand why, but it is a real way for us. So lastly, Dennis, how do we prevent poisoning by pesticide? Because it is considered by the greenies out there very serious. But if you look at the poison stats, and that comes out of Tigerberg and the Red Cross Hospital, over 70% of poison cases are medicinal of nature, in other words, clinical pharmaceuticals. Only 12% of poison cases are from pesticides, and the rest are then from the industrial chemicals like the petroleums and stuff like this. But people go ballistic when they hear about pesticide, because we then talk about the typical gif. Meanwhile, they don't understand that paracetamol is also another type of poison, just a different type of. So how do we prevent it? Because it's a bad image for us as an industry. It's bad for people on the farm. It's bad for food production, because people think that all our food is poison. No, it's a case that there was a mishap with the poison. The golden rule is follow the label instructions to the last point. And I'm coming back to my statement. I started my poison center in the year 2003. On the 8th of March 2003, I opened my Griffin Poison Center. I have never ever had a poison incident where the person followed the label. And I can't tell you how many I've had over the last sort of whatever number of years, but it was literally tens of thousands of poisoning cases, all related to not following the label. A lot of it is related to the fact that the consumers in particular don't lock the pesticides away. Well, the farm store is open and the little children come out of school in the afternoon They get into the farm store and they open the cans and they get the call, oh, there's a child with a very serious rust in the skin because they opened up a can of lambda-cyhalothrin. So these things happen. Also, to keep people, animals away from the site where pesticides are being applied. But it just amazes me to see the pesticide being applied in an orchard and the farmer drives behind the bakkie with a dog on the back of the bakkie. And I ask myself, do you like your dog? And the answer is no, you can't like your dog if you leave your dog on the back of the bakkie while your operator is busy spraying a pesticide and you've got that nebulous all around yourself. Then for the farm worker itself, or herself or himself, you tell them, you must always use your PPE as the label instructs you under precautions. That's what you have to do, because if you don't do it, you get poisoned, you've got no claim against anybody. Not against the manufacturer, not against the distribution company, not against the agrochemical rep that serves you, not against the farmer, against nobody, because by law, you have to wear the PPE as instructed by the label. Then also check that your equipment is in good working order. I've seen sprayers that have more spray going up into the sky than landing on the crop that's below. And I've asked myself, yeah, what does the farmer pay for? To spray the atmosphere or to spray the crop? So that's also a recipe for getting poisoned. Then also the poor weather conditions, where the wind is pumping like hell. Just stop when the wind gets to 15 km per hour and stop the operation, because you wasted the pesticide. You're spraying other things, you're spraying people, and you're going to contaminate somebody with the stuff. And I don't need to talk more about this. No smoking, no drinking, no eating in the store, on the tractor, while mixing, while busy for the day. Nothing of that at all. Nothing as ever. And the same thing with empty containers. Where I live in the Eastern Cape, not too far from me in Langkloof, I see on a Saturday morning farm workers walking around with empty containers going to buy whatever to put it in. I ask myself, yes, gentlemen and ladies, do you know what you're doing? Do you know the risk you're taking by putting it in there? And my question to farmers is, why the hell do you not triple rinse, puncture, and recycle your containers? You guys and girls that service the farmers as our crop advisors, hammer them without permission, hammer them, tell them. The pesticide containers may not be in the hands of farm workers after they've been properly triple rinsed and punctured. They must go into the recycling chain that CropLife established over the last 15 years. And then tell people, and I see it in the Western Cape very often with these people that go and steal crops and they sell them on the roadside. And people stop and they buy those peaches or they buy the grapes. Do you know when does the farmer spray the stuff? You got no idea. Maybe they sprayed methanol the day before and you eat it then. And what's going to happen to you? You ain't going to make it home. You might make it to Worcester, but you're not going to make it home, most definitely. So you don't eat a crop before the withholding period or the PHI expired on that particular crop. And then lastly, which we find is not such a bad thing, but I sometimes worry a bit about the fact that we don't see on all our labels the re-entry interval. Now, what does re-entry interval mean? It means, what is the time allowed after applying my pesticide to the crop that I've got to wait before I can go in where it's safe to me to walk around in the crop? Some labels say 2 days. Some labels say wait until the pesticide is dried off on the crop. I can tell you, if you applied methamphetamine in the crop, I will not go into the crop for the next 5 days. Not a damn. I won't take the risk because I know the severe risk of that particular product to myself. I won't go in there. And I've seen people going into tomato fields, come on the next morning, walking around there. We've had cases of it being applied to tomatoes, and then the next morning we get a call, 3 blueprints are dead because they walked into the crop and they made dermal contact with a chemical on the plant and they got wiped out. So these things should be common sense to people. So I appeal to all of you, preach like mad. You've got the tools now. You've been trained now. You're going to do the assessment. The assessment will be available for our crop advisors on your portal, on the CPD portal. It's going to be there. You can score yourself. I think it's 40 CPD points if you get full marks, which I think you can do. I didn't make the assessment too difficult. And you'll be certified then as a trainer by CropLife as to train the farm worker. Go out, hammer them this down the throat every year, because remember, every farm worker has to be trained and retrained every single year. That is what Global Gap demand. That's what all the certification agents demand. And that's what CropLife SA also advocates, is that we keep on training people every year. Because I can tell you, when I lived in Israel doing my postdoc there years ago, I was involved with the conservation arena also, and they were busy with a massive environmental education campaign. And they taught me that they found that you have to repeat the same message 17 times to a person to internalize that message in a person. So don't think if you train a group of farm workers want to know it. You got to go back and do refresher courses. And CropLife will be developing refresher courses for all of you to take again and to go back to your farm workers and give them information in a different type of format, more exciting, more examples and stuff like this. So that's why we say we would like you all to do the training, and we will offer you refresher courses as the time goes forward. And then lastly, before I close off, we will make an announcement, hopefully quite soon. I don't know when, Rod, about the master trainer course that we would like you to do through Stellenbosch University. And like Rod said, we don't think it's for everybody, but there might be some people interested in that you can do high-level training for people at a much higher level. But this should be adequate to train each and every single farm worker in the country who works with a pesticide. And if you've done that for your farm or for your farmers and for your clients, you would have done yourself a great favor, because it has to be done. It's the right thing to do. It safeguards your farms, it safeguards your farm workers, it safeguards your clients, it safeguards the entire CropLife SA family. And I think that is what I would like to end off, is that we have to be rather safe than sorry. So when your conscience tells you to not do something, do not do it, because it might just be the wrong thing to do. And to remediate a poison, believe me, I work with it every day. It is not nice to sit on the phone and having to call up the family, tell them, come to the hospital because your family member is going to die. And if you don't believe me, you can speak to Karin Marks at Tygerberg Poison Center. We have this dilemma every day for us that people die because of pesticide exposure. So please go out, hammer them. I want you to hammer them on responsibility for the farm workers. It is your job. Okay, I think I'm done with my stuff. There are a couple of minutes left. I wonder if I should just look at some of the questions. Let me see. There's a question here, something important. The person, Amelia Foster, asked, is it possible to see the certificates on the website? I think Amelia refers here to our recyclers to see the certificates. No, we're not going to put it on the website, because we've had fraud where people actually defraud our recyclers. They take a certificate and they polish it up and they put their own name on, and they're not certified by CropLife, and these are the rogue operators. But we are moving over with the help of Virage. We start moving over into an electronic system very soon, where the crop advisor or the recycler who is certified by us, who participates in container management, they will have the certificate electronically on their computer or the cell phone. They will also have the CODI Intel declaration electronically on the system. So, Amelia, if you just be a little bit patient with us, we've got all the work and stuff going forward, but we are moving into a space where our recyclers can show you on the telephone, this and this is my certificate. If there's any doubt from anybody whether a recycler is certified, my number is available. You've got my number there. Please, my number is never off unless I fly. And that happens maybe once or twice in a month for an hour or so. But you can contact me and ask me whether it is 100% to make use of that particular one. Let me see if there's anything else that people want to ask here that's important. Not really. Okay, Rod, are you still on the call? Rod dropped off. I think some people might have dropped off because of this terrible load shedding we've had. And I wanted Rod just to close off the session and to thank everybody, but let me do it on behalf of our CropLife SA team. This is not a Verdoorn effort. This was a CropLife SA effort from everybody. And I would like to thank our team for helping me to put this together. I would like to thank all our CropLife SA members that participated today. I would like to thank all of you that are sitting in the meeting that are part of our recycling network. And those of you that are not CropLife SA members, that might be a farmer or a consultant or whatever out there, I'm very glad that you joined us for today. I hope you learned something, and you must remember that we've got lots of other webinars coming up. You're welcome to join, and just looking forward to chatting to you again. I've got another 3 or 4 coming up, and the next ones will be from Yuresh and some of the other colleagues like Shana will do something and Leon will do something. So yeah, please keep an eye on our operations, but we want to push this idea of responsible use very hard this year. Okay, thank you very much, folks. You've got my email there. If you have something to ask urgently, please WhatsApp me, because my phone is going ballistic this afternoon with poisoning calls, or you can either then email me. And thanks again for all the participation. I think it was, for me, time which I enjoyed very much. Thank you very much. Cheers.